We'll just take roll call and Member Hall. Okay. Member Longacre. Member Bollinger. Member Lear. Okay, so thank you. Everyone is here bright and early at 8 a.m. I want to thank everyone for that. And do we have any public comment today? Okay, so let's just dive in. And Ben, are you queuing up 1.2 or is it Elise? Or is it council?
Ashley should be online with that.
Okay, Ashley, do you want to queue us up for, excuse me, AAGBL, do you want to queue us up for the American Leadership Academy waiver request?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, committee. So the agenda item 1.2 is a renewal request from American Leadership Academy to remain on the 4-day school week. The waivers being made under our 277-121. This is the first time the renewal has been made under the updated rules, which the board updated a couple months ago over the summer, that now require 2 additional stakeholder meetings, which American Leadership Academy did hold via Zoom, and they've submitted proof of those meetings in your board backup. They've also submitted all of the required data and survey information. And this would be, they've been on the waiver since the 2017-2018 school year. So this would be the 3rd renewal. And I believe Principal Morley was intending to be online if there are any further questions.
I think he may be present. If you'd come up, that'd be great.
Or present.
AGBL, may I ask you a question? And you may or may not know this. Maybe Deputy Superintendent Nui does. It seems like this charter school, American Leadership Academy, they've been on the waiver for approximately 8 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do we have any schools that you're aware of that have been on the waiver longer than that? Or
one of our rural districts, and it's escaping me right now whether it's Garfield or Boulder. One of them has been on, like, there was a gap, but they were on it in the 90s, and then there was a gap, and then they came back on it in the late, like, 2010 phase, I think. So they've probably been on it the longest.
Richard Wayne. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Mr. Morley, is that correct?
Yes.
Hey, thank you for coming in. And I, just so the committee knows, I was speaking to Mr. Morley in advance and letting him know that he's been here several times with this waiver request. I told him that today he may get more questions than usual. I know he will from me, just because, at least for me, I'm seeing a trend with this, the applications for a waiver. And I think the institution, the agency, I think we need to be more proactive in better understanding what's driving this and how do we make sure that the students are receiving the experience that they signed up for. So with that, do you want to start with an overview or summary, or do you just want to dive into questions? How would you like to do that?
I'd be happy to just take questions if that's agreeable.
It is. Member Lear?
I'm having to remember if there's a mic or not. Could we just hear first how your system works, what you do on the extra day, and just an overview of the application itself? How has it improved your culture or not, or how supportive is your community, and that, just 5 minutes or 3 or something like that.
Thank you, Carol. I'd be happy to share and give an overview of what we're doing. We started 8 years ago. Our premise was that engagement was an important thing. We saw a trend with students struggling with mental health issues, and so this was a collaborative effort with parents, students, and teachers. We came up with the idea that the thing that would be of most help for students, the vast majority of students understood the information that was being presented in the time frame. Those that we targeted were those that needed specific help. So our Friday, we developed the 4-day week with the idea that Friday would be intended for intervention. And so every Friday, intervention is available for students K-12 from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. So teachers are there to help and address specific learning needs for students from grades K-12. Over the years, based on need, we've changed how that intervention has been done, but currently the way it's being done is that from K-6, students are selected based on benchmark testing, and they are specifically asked or invited to come in on Friday. And then they are provided targeted from K-12, from K-6, they're provided targeted intervention in reading and math for 2 hours. So they get an hour of targeted intervention in English or reading, and then they get targeted intervention in math for an hour. From grades 7 through 12, we have teachers available, and the teachers are there in all grade levels, and they provide whatever assistance the students need. So if they need help in social studies, they can get targeted help in social studies. If they need help in English English, math. So all of those are available. So that's kind of how we're currently running our Friday intervention program. We also have some extensions where we try to plan 5 or 6 large events on Fridays where we do enrichment. Those have been such things such as taking them to colleges, universities, getting our students, out and seeing what to kind of target our college and career readiness programs. So on Friday, we've also done we do some field trips on Friday with some of the students. So those are some of the enrichment activities that we've done on Fridays.
I don't have a lot of questions, but I did have one quick follow-up question to that. So unlike some of the other waivers we've seen, it's sounding like your teachers have a full workday on Friday. Is that accurate?
So every other Friday, they have a kind of a normal work day. We call those teacher development days. They're there. That's when they'll do PLCs. That's when they will do faculty meeting, and they have some general time in the classroom for preparation and to do additional lesson preparation and grading, gradebook kind of work that they're on the clock for and they're being paid for. On the other Fridays that are non-teacher development days, teachers that come in, they get paid an additional stipend to come in and to help the students on those days. So it's not required. So it's the teachers, we will have at least one teacher from each department there to help, but not every teacher is there on those days. So,
Member Longacre?
Thank you. I'm actually really fascinated by the 4-day school week. Do you find that kids that are invited because they need intervention, do they come? Do most of them come, and what's the percentage, or do they just consider that a day off?
So that's a great question. That is one of the challenges that you have where we don't provide transportation. That can become a challenge. Really, the success rate what we found is the success rate on getting students there is tied directly to the teacher's involvement and how emphatic the teacher is about the students being there. So as we get a little bit later in the year, the student participation rate goes up because the teachers actually become a little more earnest in their invitation to the parents. And we find that there's a direct relationship to that.
Yeah, one more question if you don't mind. Do you find that because teachers have more time on certain Fridays, that you have been able to get away from so much tech because they have time to grade papers and do more work not digitally?
So I would say that is something that as a group we've talked about. They are more tech involved. So the teachers are still, I think COVID really pushed us in that direction. And now trying to dial it back, that's been something as an administrative team we've talked about because we felt like we've become too reliant on it and they're putting the kids on more than they should. So that's something as an organization we've actually been addressing this year and encouraging the teachers to go back and to pull the computers back and limit the time that the kids are on computers in school. And so I would say, yes, it does provide them with that time. Is it something that is where we want it? Not yet.
So, Mr. Morley, I just have, if we could just start with two perspective questions. So it looks like from the data that you've provided, overwhelming support from the teachers, the parents, surprisingly less so with the students in some regards. And we
Yes.
talked about why that was, because you typically don't see that when schools go to the 4-day instructional week. But were you there when the school initially made the decision to go to the 4-day instructional week?
Yes, sir.
And the results that you have experienced to date, would you say they exceeded your expectations, met your expectations, mixed results? How would you summarize that over the past 8 years?
So I would say that they're very much in line with what we'd anticipated. So academically, we did not believe that it was going to be a huge increase. We didn't think that there would be a decrease, and it stayed pretty consistent across the board. What what I think has improved is overall culture. Families, are one of our tenets of our school is that we partner with families. We believe that the family really is the key to helping students. High expectation for students. Having family involvement is really important for a child's education. What we hear consistently from families is that over the last 8 years, even in particular, families have more flexible, fathers, mothers have more flexible work schedules, and they've really appreciated longer weekends, and that they take and use those to take their children to go do exploring. They do hiking, they go on camp trips, they do vacations, they go tour around and do different things, and they appreciate the ability to be able to take their children and have a more direct influence in their children's education in that regard. So we've found that has been very, very helpful.
And what about, we had a school come in and they were making the application, and one of the things they listed was an expectation that as an institution there would be a monetary benefit. And I believe this was a district, so they would be able to save on transportation that day and other things. As you look back over the 8 years, has your institution been able to see a net positive in terms of, wow, this is saving us money as an unexpected or planned benefit of going to the 4-day instructional week?
So that's a great question. When we did research on this initially, that was not our intention, was to save money. And research showed that districts that had done it for that reason generally did not save significant amounts of money. I mean, if I recall, it's been 8 years, but as I recall, it was 1% to 2% at best if they saved anything at all. And so that was not our intention. So we didn't cut salaries. Our buildings are open probably just as long or longer on Friday than they are any other day of the week. We've got students that are there, doing play practice, which has been actually a really positive thing, because now instead of students practicing until 9 o'clock at night for a play rehearsal, they can come in on Friday and do it during the day, freeing up those evening hours and giving them time throughout the week. And so I think when we look at our net positive mental health, that goes way up. Savings, it's neutral. We have not seen a savings.
And just one other general question: the students where if the primary reason or driver was to help those students with mental health related issues, are they invited? Like when you look and say, these students would really benefit, are they invited to participate? Is it required that they come in on Friday? How is that administered?
So it is an invitation, and so what you see in the secondary, it's pretty consistent throughout the elementary because their interventions are invited and they're targeting specific things like reading and math instruction based on benchmark testing. For the secondary, they're able to come in kind of at will as they need, and so what you'll see is really high fluctuations. The attendance at Friday intervention at the beginning of a term is fairly low. As you start to move throughout, starting from at about the middle of the term to the end of the term, it goes, it spikes. The last 2 weeks of a term, you've got 150, 200 kids, and we're a smaller school, so that represents a decent percentage of the student population showing up to finalize. And when we were here 3 years ago, board member Lear asked us to track some information, and so if it's okay, I'll give you some of the findings that we've tracked over the last couple of years. So over the last every Friday intervention, this is just secondary, we have tracked the number of students that have come in and the number of hours spent, the number of tests taken, because they'll come in and take a test or finish a homework assignment or just get additional assistance. And so we have had in that time, so this is years 24-25, so this past year, we had 4,009 students come in for intervention. That was an estimated 12,534 hours that were spent in intervention. We had 803 tests taken. We had 972 assignments completed. And we had 420 students come in just for additional, just because they didn't understand something and needed additional support. So during that time, those are that's kind of how those numbers break out. Some of the other reasons they were there is for rehearsals. And so a lot of that time, or some of that time, would have shown up as rehearsal time on Friday. And then the year previous, we had 3,005 students attend. We had a total of 403 students show up for just understanding. Homework was 806. Assessments were 669 the previous year. So we felt like the Friday enrichment has been successful on many fronts. The one area that we thought would be benefited more, and it may be a system issue on our end, but we anticipated with the 4-day week that attendance would increase, and that has stayed pretty flat. So that has not increased as much as we had anticipated. So that, if we were to say, was there one shocker, that would be my one takeaway as a shocker.
Let me ask one other question, then I'll turn it back over to the board. I'm looking at what you submitted, and was that data submitted in your packet? I didn't see
So
it.
it was not. That was just it was kind of embedded in some of. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, they're looking that up. If we could turn to your ALA report card, end of year data submission.
Yes.
Elise, did you just call that out? Wow, you're good. Okay, so if we look at that, I'm looking at these numbers and they strike me as significant. What we're seeing in terms of performance.
Yes.
Are these in line with your expectations? I mean, we're seeing some of these jump by high single digits or even double digits in terms of increase in performance. What do you attribute that to?
So I think like all schools coming out of COVID, we've looked at institutional deficiencies and areas, and so we're really trying to put an emphasis on improving our structure, our teaching. We feel like as a whole, things are, we're not where we want to be as an organization. We feel like we should be much higher, and so we're trying to put a much stronger emphasis on that, on teaching and learning. So I don't think that is attributed necessarily to the 4-day week, more just we need better academics.
Okay. Member Bollinger and then Member Longacre.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments, if I may, Chair. First of all, I'm a big fan of the 4-day week. I love that you guys are doing this. I wish as a principal I could have done this.
Yeah,
for
it's
several
wonderful.
reasons. Couple of questions. One of the things that I've read in research on a 4-day school week is an increase in teacher retention. Can you help us understand, has that impacted retention at your school at all?
So we've got a lot of our teachers really like the 4-day week. So yeah, I believe that it's a reason why people would want to come, and I believe that it's a reason for people to stay. We live, our district is within the Nebo School District. As a charter school, we're smaller, and so our classroom sizes are a little smaller. So we try to stay competitive in pay, but we pay less than the district around us. So the fact that we're able to retain teachers the 4-day week is significant.
Thank you. And another question, as far as services, I noticed that the percentage of students that are free and reduced lunch is pretty high for a small school. Do you provide lunch on Fridays?
So we do not. So we're not funded. It's not a school day, so it's not one of those things that's funded, and so we don't provide lunch on Fridays, but we don't keep kids there past 10 o'clock. So we're from 8 to 10.
But that hasn't been a problem with or concern from parents?
It has not been brought up, no.
Okay. And one other thing I just wanted to point out, I was actually looking up your school report cards on our school report card website. And one of the things that really stood out for me, and this is not just for your K-8, but also the high school, and all 3 years that we have on here, is the level of growth.
Yeah.
And ranked as exemplary and or very high for growth. So one of the things, sometimes when we look at proficiency, we can be typical, but it's that growth piece. And I think that that's where that intervention piece speaks to, is that you're meeting kids in their individual needs, and love to see that much growth in students. And I do think over time, growth does lead to increased proficiency. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
She just went.
Longacre.
I'm Longacre. This is Bollinger. That's okay. Thanks for asking about the lunch, because I had that question too. I'm just looking at the survey, and the responses are astounding of how much, how very satisfied students are, parents, and teachers. And my question is, the first year that you did this, went to the 4-day work week, did you have a lot of families leave? And then as time goes on, do you find that as people find out that you have a 4-day school week, has your enrollment increased? What's your enrollment been throughout these years?
So initially we saw, thank you, great questions. So initially we saw an increase in enrollment. After COVID, it kind of has dropped down, and we've kind of maintained a kind of a steady level. Families, when we first started the 4-day school week, there was concern over, hey, what do we do with daycare? How does this impact? What we've found and what has been typical for most of the families is that once the routine is established, it becomes a non-issue. That the hey, what are we going to do at first becomes the hard part after they've got the plan worked out. Then it's actually harder. In order to get our 990 hours, we end up having 3 in-school Fridays. Those are the most poorly attended days of the year because families have worked out their system, they have their plan for daycare or how they're going to do things. And so in the surveys, in the written survey on the comments, the number one comment is get rid of in-school Fridays. We don't want them. They're terrible. Don't have them. That's universal from parents to students. Those aren't good. So once they get that figured out, it's a non-issue as far as daycare goes. As far as parents and people coming, we're a charter school. We're supposed to be different. And so I would say the reason people come is they like the 4-day week. The reason people stay is because we provide what they need. One of our sales pitches is, hey, if we have what you need, we're better for you. If we don't have what you need, then another school, we believe in school choice. That's what it's about. So I think the 4-day week is really good, but I don't think it's the only reason why people come or why people stay.
Do you find that because you're a 4-day not work week for teachers, yes, but for students, do you have enough time to get through all of the curriculum? And if you don't, well, I'll leave that question.
So yes, we do. We modify, most curriculums are written, in fact, all curriculums are written for a 5-day week. We do have the 990 hours, and so the days are a little bit longer, and so it's adjusting how those are being taught. But yes, we are able to get through the curriculum. I think the instructive thing there is to look at we're also a dual immersion school. So when you look at our dual immersion scores, we rank extraordinary. And that is a very demanding, time-consuming program. And our teachers do it very well. And our students score extremely well in our dual immersion program.
Mr. Morley, just some more specific questions. And one, Board Member Bollinger asked you about teacher retention.
Yes.
Do you find being on the 4-day instructional week acts as an incentive? So not retention, but attraction to teaching at your institution?
Yes.
And how do you determine that?
Generally, people will say, hey, I noticed you guys do a 4-day week, and that made me interested. That's why I applied.
And are those individuals primarily coming from within the teaching profession, meaning they're at a neighboring school, or are they just beginning and they want to start out on a 4-day instructional week?
I would say we get both. Yeah, I would say we get both.
And then just 2 more questions. If we could jump into the survey that you provided, and
Yes.
I'm looking specifically at students 3rd through 12th grade 4-day school week evaluation.
Yes. The overall satisfaction?
No, this
Number?
is the, overall satisfaction number 1.
Question number 1? Yes.
Yeah. Now, this looks different than, I'm looking at the survey that says on a scale from 1 to 5, how satisfied are you with the 4-day school week format?
Yes.
And you had 240 responses,
Yes.
and 17.5% of the students, it appears, said they were very unsatisfied.
Yes.
And typically, we don't see that, I think for 2 reasons. One, if they're not good survey results, sometimes they're not presented.
Right.
And sometimes, generally, students are very happy. So when I saw almost 20% coming in saying we're very unsatisfied, it caught my attention. Why is that? I have a son.
Yeah.
He intentionally gives the wrong answers to survey results. It's his mission. Is that something that happened here? How can you account for that? Do you consider that a significant number? And then what happened?
So honestly, I don't know what happens because that's not the feedback. That it kind of runs counter to what we've heard and see from the students. So as I kind of shared with you before the meeting, I think what could be represented in some of this may be that the survey was taken by students from grades 3 through 12, and sometimes younger students would get the scale mixed up and would mark the opposite end when they, not really understanding. They're not really great survey takers at that age. So I would suspect that some of that is reflected in this survey when you might have younger students taking the survey, because that doesn't really coincide with. There may be some students also that, their parents have moved them to a charter school and they would rather be back with their friends at a district school, and so they're marking that they're just overall not satisfied. They want to be back with their friends. So
Thank you. And just two other questions. One has to do with, and again, this may be more anecdotal evidence, but if you do have data on it, that would be great. What do you think the number one, I'll use the word grievance, but dissatisfaction point is for our teachers when it came to the 4-day week? Is there any persistent, ongoing issues that they express concern about? And I would like you to address that for our teachers as well as the parents.
Okay. So I would say for teachers, one of the challenges, and it would be unique to our system and the way we're managing the 4-day school week, but it's that they only do PLC every other week. So having PLC, they get more time on those weeks, but the space in between is a little bit longer. And so not being able to touch base and be able to have those PLCs weekly, having time carved out weekly. And so we've looked at trying to address that. We're trying not to bring them in. The benefit of the 4-day week for the teachers are having a Friday off every other week to do things. And so trying to balance that. But consistently over the last 8 years, that would be one of the bigger things that teachers are saying is, hey, we're not able to get together in a PLC as often. That's what I hear the most from teachers. From parents, honestly, the only thing that we really hear is don't have Friday school. We're totally good with, we've got our system worked out, just, to get your 990 hours. The problem is they don't want to start any earlier in the year. We start generally in August, August 12th, and they want to be done by Labor Day or Memorial Day. They want to be done by Memorial Day. And so in order to get that accomplished, we have to get the 990 hours, we have to do a couple of Friday schools. So other than that, parents have seemed to be very, very pleased with the 4-day week.
And then, Mr. Morley, last one. We had talked about if you would be willing to accept a survey from USBE on this issue in terms of allowing us to administer a survey through you and your institution to better understand the positives and negatives associated with the 4-day instructional week. Is that something that you would be open to and permit us to do, subject to your review and approval? But would that be something you would be willing to do, and do you see a benefit from that?
So we've started the 4-day week because we believe that it is beneficial for kids and families, for students and families. And so if we would be interested in exploring and understanding how that benefits our families as well. So I don't think, as long as we could work collaboratively on it, I think we would be interested in doing so. We offer surveys every year to get feedback on the 4-day school week. And so we are interested in learning what we could do to better meet the needs of our families. So yeah, I don't see that as being a concern.
Okay, and then I just have if AAG Beal is still on. Hey, so
I am, yes.
AAG Beal, I know that you dug extensively into this area. You did a lot of research on it. Were there any questions that you have or you think we maybe missed that would be beneficial, not only for this application, but just in general?
The only thing I think that you guys have asked about previously that I don't think was touched on today, and I don't know, I think it was with specifics to a district that had a really high percentage of special education learners, but you guys previously had questions about whether there were any kind of struggles with providing services or meeting the needs under IEPs for special education students on the 4-day week.
I think that's a fantastic question.
Yeah. So from, our SPED director would probably be able to answer that more completely for you, but from the information that I have in talking to and meeting with and going to IEPs is that we find that parents have the same general feeling or positive feeling about the 4-day week. We do offer summer, for those students that qualify through special education, we offer the extended programs for students with special needs. And as a general rule, they seem to have the same feelings about and score the same on with special ed students as the general population. We have not seen any significant difference. The students are provided, we've got work-based learning. So students that have or qualify or need those services are getting them. If that is involved on a Friday, then they're taken and they do their Friday work as well. So they come in and get Friday remediation and Friday help just the same as the other students. So perhaps even more so in some regards.
Thank you. And AAG Beal, you indicated that this is the first time that American Leadership Academy has sought a waiver after we changed our waiver rules. And you indicated that our change required that the institution have 2 more additional meetings.
That's correct, yes.
Yes.
And so can I ask you, Mr. Morley, how has that worked out? It may be difficult for you to say you find them unbeneficial to the body that said do them, but your candid assessment, has that helped? Do you see a direct benefit from that?
So when the first year we did when we proposed the 4-day school week, we had parent meetings. We did exactly what this process is requiring, even though it was not required, because we wanted to understand what the needs were. Those meetings then were better attended. This time, with a 93% highly satisfied with it. We did not. The first meeting, we didn't get anybody that attended the meeting. The second time, we had one person who attended the meeting, and that was just to say, I just wanted to make sure we're going to keep the 4-day week. Just wanted to make sure that wasn't going to be a problem. So a few years ago in a survey, I think it was our first renewal, there was some concern by parents that we weren't going to get it, and so they wrote in favor of. But for the renewal, those that aren't happy and don't like the 4-day week have probably weeded themselves out and are no longer a part of the school. So it would make sense that you would have a very high percentage of parents that are satisfied.
And our rule, does it permit you to meet in person as well as have an online component?
Yes.
Okay. And even with that, you had nobody attend the first meeting and one person attend the second meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That was instructional.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? If not, we're ready for a motion.
Make the motion that the committee approve American Leadership Academy request for a waiver renewal from R277-419-4 and forward to the board for approval.
That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I do have a question for Deputy Superintendent Nui. If we wanted to entertain as a body sending a request to the full board regarding the administration of a survey that we prepare, but that would be administered by and through American Leadership Academy, not so much on their particular practices, but to allow us to really begin gathering data on what seems to be an increasing trend. How would that look? What would we request as a body?
It's a really good question. I'm thinking about that, Chair. If we could talk about that maybe when we take a break and what that would look like and propose something here in this meeting later on, if that works. Thank you.
That sounds great. And again, I want to make sure that that was just an inquiry, no motions being made. Okay, thank you. With that, let's go to the next matter, which I believe is 1.3 R277-322, Local Education Agency Codes of Conduct. And then Vice Chair Bollinger, because this is my application to the board, I would ask if you could assume the duties of chair for this particular item.
Yeah, I would be happy to.
Thank you.
Okay, so since you are the one that helped sign on for it, would you like us to have an introduction to? I know that this is something that we've had on our agenda before. We asked to hold it back to this committee meeting as well. So I will turn the time to you to introduce where we're at with that.
Thank you. So since our last meeting, I have continued to hear from individuals both passively, meaning they would just reach out, but proactively as well, reaching out to my districts as well as other districts to receive their input. I will say that no one has been shy about what they like and what they don't like, and I think that's a good thing. Because I think it means that what we're doing is going to have significant impact. It was sobering to hear Mr. Morley say, and he didn't say this, these are my words, but this may have been well-intentioned when you asked us to do 2 more meetings, and it got me thinking, well, maybe we should have said, if you're new to this endeavor, then you have to have these meetings, but if you've been doing it for 3-4 years, maybe we change that. And so this is a rule that really needs to be done right, and that's why I asked for the additional time. And I am prepared to make amendments to via motion to draft 2, which reflects that feedback that I received. But otherwise, I think the reasons for this don't need to be restated. We have a UPPAC process where if you are a licensed educator, we can exercise general control and oversight. We really can look and say, is this individual, should they be in our school? Should they be near our students? We don't have that same general control and oversight when it comes to individuals in our schools who are not licensed educators. And this code of conduct would allow us, and again, this is just building off of what was already in our rule, allow this board to have greater visibility and provide more transparency to all stakeholders, our parents, our educators, the legislature, on what is taking place in the schools regarding this great swath of individuals. There were some board members who were in one of the districts that I spoke with, and I forget the exact ratio, but it was for every licensed educator, there may have been 3 or 4 non-licensed educators in those schools. That's a lot of people who have regular interaction and access to our students that we have very limited or no understanding of their background, their history. But what really was the impetus for this change, I was talking to a member on our staff who said, look, we had a complaint against an individual at a charter school. And as this matter was looked into, this individual apparently was going from one charter school to the next, because as the system caught up with their behavior, which was highly inappropriate, the charter school would do what they needed to do, which was termination. But this individual would just go to the next charter school, and there was no way for this body or institution to warn or flag the next institution the way we are with educators. So that was the impetus for these changes. And I'm willing to take questions, but we can do that now. But I would like to, I think the better way, but I'll defer to the chair. I can take questions and then make the changes, but if I make the changes, that may address some of the questions. But I'm willing to proceed as the chair dictates.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So my understanding is you would like to work on making amendments to the current draft, is your plan?
Yeah, that's appropriate. I do have, I think, about 4 amendments, some insignificant, some that are major.
Okay. All right. Did you?
I don't have amendments. I have more. I can't amend this the way it needs to be amended.
Did you want to make, go ahead, Member Lair.
I'm going to repeat this one more time. I ask forgiveness for people who actually remember these comments. And let me start in a little bit different way. First of all, we have another rule about non-licensed people and codes of conduct, R277-316, that addresses many of the same issues and sets a requirement that an LEA have a policy requiring a non-licensed public employee, a volunteer, or a charter school board member to report offenses, post the policy, all that kind of stuff in 316. If the point is to establish a code of conduct for non-licensed employees, I think this would be a far better choice of a rule to use. And it is kind of odd that we have 2 rules. Now I'll go into my repeated spiel. About 2 years ago, risk management worked with all state agencies to about a concern that risk had, that it was maybe covering employees and granting governmental immunity to state agencies, state entities, when the risk was not sure that these employees had been trained and had agreed to these codes of conduct. There is a specific section in the code, 63G-7-301, that speaks to education employees. And it specifically requires a code of conduct, a model policy from the USBE, and training that meets that model policy. That was negotiated between the then AAG and the risk manager. And all of that came about specific to the concern that government entities would be covered by governmental immunity if their employees were aware that their behavior had to meet certain standards. So many of the phrases that have been struck, but not consistently in this rule, are literally in the authorizing statute. Position of special trust. And it's struck, but it's still in the rule on line 15. So it's hard to understand what the intent might be. But that specific phrase was used so it would encompass employees, but it would also encompass volunteers who had significant unsupervised access to students. It would also have cover people, quasi-employees, I guess you might say, who are paid a stipend. So it's a broader, it's intended to be a broader phrase. So to just strike that without any reference to the statute, which specifically, I don't know if I want to say requires, but uses that in the authorizing statute, seems like not a good idea. The other thing that's similar to that is down in lines, starting at line 73-ish, some specific offenses were listed in the authorizing statute, physical abuse, and so on, sexual conduct on line 81. Those are specifically defined in code. And I think at the time, the AAG stretched those by adding verbal abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse, about as far as she could within the definitions of the code. Currently, lines 74 through 83 are undefined in Utah code. They're very conversational, physical harm or mistreatment, but they're not defined terms. So an employee who agrees to a code of conduct, who, in order to work in a governmental entity, and specifically in a public school, is left uncertain about what he or she's agreeing to avoid or not do. So there was a reason for those specific terms to be used, and now they're more conversational or more general, and I believe are inappropriate in this rule. Those were the two primary problems. The other thing I have to mention is that the training, at the time, the AAG was very earnest in making sure that all 150 LEAs had put this code of conduct in place and had training. And I think there was also some assistance from our office to make the training consistent with the code of conduct. So now, should this be changed, all LEAs would have to revise their codes of conduct. They would have to revise their training. There would, if we stay consistent with the statute, which we can't change in our rule, there would have to be training that is now consistent with the code of conduct for every LEA. So all of that history is to say, I think a much better approach, if Chair Carey believes or others believe that a code of conduct is in order for non-licensed employees, then let's look at R277-316. And let's make sure we include some individuals which are not included in this particular draft. Again, volunteers with significant unsupervised access to students. Make it clear that even testing paras, and they're not really paras, but testing people who come in to provide testing for students on a one-time basis who are paid stipends would also be included in this. Because right now that does not read that way. So my substitute motion would be, and this is not, I know there's some concern by some that I just don't like this rule, or or it's just not what we've always had. That's not it at all. I believe we're not capturing what we really want to capture in this rule. And I believe if someone is asked to sign a code of conduct, it should have in terms that are defined, not just somebody's idea of abuse or mistreatment. And so I feel like I'd like to reconsider putting a code of conduct or revising the code of conduct rule that really addresses this in a broader, more comprehensive way, which is in R277-316, and then leave in place this negotiated agreement that was codified between risk management and government entities, including public schools, so that the LEAs don't have to do the work of all 150 LEAs And not to mention our staff, who was directed to create a model code of conduct in that statute, doesn't have to change all of that and provide new training and precisely per the authorizing statute for the purpose of governmental immunity, not just a general desire to have a code of conduct. So if you want me right now, I can make a motion to re-examine 316 and have whatever elements of this the board accepts put into 316, which is, I think, a much better place for it, covers more employees, and leave this alone because it's not at all consistent with the authorizing statute right now. That was a
So,
long
Member
comment.
Lear,
I apologize.
are you making an official motion or you want to continue discussion?
I said if that, others might have something to say about this, so I don't know if I should start with that motion or let others speak and then we can come back to the motion.
Okay, we're going to go back to Chair Carey. Looks like he has do you have comments on that?
I'll just respond and say that, again, when I have spoken to superintendents, I've spoken to more attorneys than I have since I was practicing law. And again, they were quite clear on what they liked and what they didn't like, and those concerns have been addressed. And I would just say that, when it comes to 114, the refrain is, well, we need to give it more time. We need to let this marinate and let the process work. And now on this rule, it sounds like, well, this has been around for a while. We really shouldn't make these changes. The concerns that were shared that I felt would improve this rule are reflected. The additional ones I will make after Board Member Lear makes her motion. But again, the comment was, we don't need to establish a code of conduct. We don't. This code of conduct that's in this rule has been here for a while. I'm not establishing it. I'm saying that in light of the concerns that are being expressed by parents and others, it needs to be amended and adjusted. And I believe that we've done that in a good way. So if, again, it's at the chair's discretion, but we can proceed on the motion or as the chair determines.
Do you want me to make the motion? At least we'll have a motion on the table.
I'm facilitating, so if you have a motion, I'd be happy to hear your motion.
Again, and I keep saying again and again, this is not a delay approach. And when we say it's been around for a while, it's been around for exactly a year and a half. So it hasn't been around very long. And I don't know how you square the changes in this rule with the authorizing statute. It's just not, it's not consistent with the statute. And that concerns me primarily legally, but it also doesn't give, with a number of definitions in here that are, with a lack of definitions in here, what is, again, if we go back to those, what is verbal mistreatment? I would suggest that there is sometimes verbal mistreatment in board meetings. What is intimidate? What is verbal intimidation? What is sexual conduct? Not sexual abuse, but sexual conduct. What does that mean? Is that holding hands? Is that touching another student or a person? These are not defined terms, whereas the others that are in the statute, in the rule previously were. So, with that sort of explanation, I move that we, let me see how I want to say this.
I've got something on the screen. That's the start.
Thank you, Ben. That does help. I move that the committee table R277-322 and revisit R277-316 in a future committee meeting. Let me just add that no, I don't even need to add that because I think it goes without saying that if these are good ideas, they'll find their way into 316. And then we won't have, and we can we can require training, we can require a model policy, or we can require, I'm speaking to my motion, sorry. I think that satisfies what I would make as a motion. So let me just repeat that. I move that the committee table R277-322 and revisit R277-316 in a future committee meeting.
Okay, so the motion is that the table, or that the committee table R277-322 and revisit R277-316 in a future committee meeting. Deputy Superintendent Nui, can you help just for this, for the public and for this committee, can you help us understand what tabling would do versus like a postponement?
My understanding, and AAG Bill can correct me if I'm wrong, but a tabling would put it on hold indefinitely until someone made an active motion to bring it back to the group.
Okay, so just to clarify, that means that then we would have to have 3 members sign back on to bring it back, or is that just when how would we know when it's ready to be brought back?
Great question for AAG Bill.
Okay, AAG Bill, can you help us understand that?
That is a great question. Let me look quickly at
Just wanna
Robert's
be
rules.
clear on what we're voting for, or if any amendments would need to be made before we move forward.
She's got a big fat book that we all have.
If she's watching, she's shouting right now. This is the answer.
Okay, so the motion to postpone will return automatically at a specific time. So it would be to postpone to a definite time. The motion to lay on the table would just require a subsequent motion to take it up from the table. So any member could motion to take it up from the table at a subsequent meeting.
Okay, thank you, AAG Bill. So to be clear, so in this committee meeting, somebody could bring it back as a motion to take it off the table?
Correct.
Okay, so that's, all right, so we do have a motion on the table. Chair Carey.
Yeah, I'd just like to speak in opposition to the motion, but it's my understanding with the motion to remove from the table, what makes that difficult is that it still has to be listed as a matter for consideration. We still have to give notice, so it wouldn't just be, oh, we're meeting next month, let's make a motion to remove it from the table. You'd have to go back, get the 3 board members, get leadership to approve it, get the executive leadership team to approve it. Then, it's my understanding, get it listed, and then when it's listed, you could make the application to remove it from the table. Otherwise, you'd be able to discuss something that wasn't noticed.
Okay, it looks like
So Robert's rules, oh, sorry.
that's okay. Go ahead, AAG Bill.
So Robert's rules allows you to motion to bring something off of the table in the same session or during the next regularly scheduled session. And then after that, it would follow the process that Chair Carey said. So it could be brought up this session or the next regularly scheduled non-licensing meeting.
Okay, thank you, AAG Bill. I have Member Lear and then Member Longacre.
And by contrast, if the decision is, as the motion states, to revise R277-316, that could be on the agenda as early as in December as a alternative to revising R277-322. So it doesn't really amount to much delay. There could be discussion of these same issues in a different format that doesn't undo what was done with risk management a year and a half ago, and doesn't require LAAs to immediately put out new codes of conduct for all their employees, create new training, have a model policy, and we could still address the concerns about employees that are non-licensed, in addition to the broader range of individuals, which was the intent of using the word person in a position of special trust, so that we could encompass volunteers and that we could encompass and make sure that the understanding was anyone who's in the building, either in a long-term or a significant volunteer capacity, or working with students broader than in the building, would also be covered under the Code of Conduct. So we could pick up on these issues with R277-316 as soon as next month.
Okay, Member Longacre.
If I could just make an amendment to the motion and just postpone it until next month.
Okay, so Member Longacre, so you're looking to switch out the word table to postpone, and then instead of a future committee meeting, your amendment would be for, is it a specific meeting? Is it the December?
Just the next law on licensing, and I don't know if we need to revisit 316, but at least just postpone R277-322.
Okay, so if you were just going to postpone and leave 316 in, it would be, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, it would be an amendment. If you wanted to just only focus on 322, it would be a substitute motion.
Okay, yeah, substitute.
If Member O'Leary was amenable to that, you could probably just make that change to her motion.
I'm sorry to sound so persistent, but I don't care if we bring back, if you postpone 322, but I don't understand what the objection is to developing this code of conduct in a more appropriate rule that then wouldn't make it inconsistent with the statute. And that's more of a rhetorical statement. So it seems a little inconsistent to say postpone 322 and 16. It seems we can accomplish in 316 everything that you have or that we want, the board accepts in, we can accomplish all that in 316. So I think the tabling allows 322 to go away if we can accomplish that through 316 without kind of pitting them against each other, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Erin?
Mhm.
Why I'm saying that?
Okay, so Member Longacre, since this is your motion, I'm going to leave it to you if you'd like to do the substitute motion or an amended motion.
Yeah, I'll just do the substitute motion.
Okay, that's in
So
order.
read that.
So this, yep.
So I make a motion that the committee postpone R277-322 to December Law and Licensing Committee meeting.
And that would be without any discussion of, without any contemplation of 316.
And that is something where if you wanted 316 to be on, from my understanding, if you wanted 316 to be on the table, that's something that you could have 3 members sign on to get that on to the
Right.
agenda, or see if leadership would be amenable to
That's
that.
really confusing, but it is a possibility. Well, better to postpone than to try to, this can't be amended today, in my view, because it legally cannot be made consistent with the statute. And I don't know how we feel good about putting in an authorizing statute and writing a rule that's not consistent with that. So I think this is maybe what we can get today. And then see if we have to have the full board discussion of 322, we'll do it again next month. So that's kind of a lukewarm acceptance of the substitute motion.
I'd like to speak to the motion.
Yeah, Chair Carey.
So it's interesting because the reason that person in a position of special trust was removed from the original draft was on the recommendation of the same board member who is now saying it needs to be included. So again, that kind of, and I understand sometimes you receive additional information, but I would also like to point out if these concerns were so grave and so deep, I would expect whether they're a member of the board or a stakeholder to reach out as others have, which is one of the reasons why we granted the extension. So I will respect Board Member Longacre's substitute motion. I appreciate the changes. I think it allows to to have this matter discussed in the upcoming committee meeting, but I will renew my call. If anyone has concerns, you can wait till this committee meeting. And I am happy to consider them at committee, but it was my understanding one of the reasons we waited 30 additional days was so that members could bring their concerns. Some have, some chose to wait. But I believe the process is better served when those are made in advance. But I know that Board Member Longacre is working closely with her district, and to the extent that she may have questions or concerns, as with other members, we want those addressed. So I am in support of the current motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Carey. And I would also speak in favor. I've also been working with the constituents in my area. My understanding was that we were going to try to postpone this to December, and so I didn't come prepared today with amendments. Had I known that that was our intent, I would have spent more time and energy on this rule. So to the point of, I'm not sure that amending this in the meeting today will get us where we need to be. I want to make sure we do this right. I think that when we're making these changes, just much to what you spoke to, Chair Carey, as far as sometimes there's a lot of unintended consequences, and being able to engage with our LEAs and have them have their eyes on the amendments that we're looking to make actually provides us better feedback, and I think ends in better policy and better rules. So just a thought, I mean, I'm not going to make an amendment or a motion on it, just a thought that if there is a draft 3 that would be proposed, that then we can speak with our LEAs on with the motions that it sounded like you did have some motions that you wanted to make, Chair Carey, and so that would be just a suggestion, but I'm not going to make a motion. I would love to be able to see a draft 3 if just so we have full context as we're working with our constituents. Let's see, member there.
And I just had one final comment, and that was that I addressed the inconsistency between the revised rule and the statute at least 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago. And to me, if a person calls attention to the not just minor differences between the authorizing statute and the rule, that says that is just one of the primary concerns about rule writing. It has to be consistent with the authorizing statute. I didn't think there was more to be said except, oh wait, do I need to remind you that this is inconsistent with the authorizing statute, which I said even repeatedly after I said it the first time. So I believe there has been discourse about the inconsistencies, and I don't believe some of these can't be fixed. And I think in the discussion with LEAs, I hope that you'll bring to the attention of the LEAs you talk with the authorizing statute, so that the attorneys who work with those LEAs will be aware that we've got a rule, we've got an authorizing statute, and the two should meet up and not be inconsistent. So that I just wanted to say that I have felt like I have been addressing this concern with both Member Carey and with others consistently for at least 6 weeks, probably longer than that. As soon as I saw this rule, the changes, I realized it was very different than what the authorizing statute says and intends.
If I may respond.
Yeah, Chair Carey, go ahead.
Just want to make sure it's clear on the record that, our AAG and staff have reviewed the rule, have not interpreted it the same way that that Board Member Lear is. And again, you bring 5 attorneys into a room, you're going to get 12 different opinions. So just to say that I am not convinced that the interpretation is accurate, but it is certainly something, now that we have the additional time, I'll speak with our staff again, continue to speak with our LEAs, and again, if board members have a particular preference on language or changes, please get those to me so we can incorporate those where possible. Thank you.
Member Hall.
Well, as everyone knows, I'm new to this, so I'm shaking my head like I understand what Carol with Member Lear is talking about, but I have no idea. So I wanna take a moment and ask: are you saying that I'm sorry? Are you saying that 322 is in conflict with 316 when you're talking about the authorized? Okay, can you help me understand what you mean by the authorizing statute?
That's a really fair question, and I'm sorry that I wasn't clear about that. The statute, when we have at the beginning of a rule, it says this rule is authorized by, and in this case, it says this authorized, and there's several sections, but the one that is most specific is it's authorized by section 63G-7-301. And that's, if you look at that statute, which this says 301, and I think it is 301. I think it's 7-301 if I'm recalling right. And so if you go to that statute, Member Hall and others who are asking, you'll find some specific direction for the state board writing a rule. And part of that direction is that the board will write the rule, and it has a definition of person of special trust. I forget the exact phrase. That is used in that statute. It also has a requirement for training that follows up with the code of conduct that is supposed to be created by the USBE to then help inform LEAs. And so all of those pieces are actually in the statute telling the USBE to some extent what its rules should look like. So that's what I mean. So 316 and 322 are, this proposed 322, are a little bit in conflict, as I'm recalling. I haven't read it in detail. 316 leaves more autonomy for local boards to create their own codes of conduct, but it says that they must do that. So there's not as much, it's not as jarring a conflict between R277, 322, and 316.
Does that help, Member Hall?
It does. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thanks for asking that question.
Okay, any further discussion to the motion on the table? All right, with that, we'll go back to the motion on the table that the committee postpone R277-322 to the December Law and Licensing Committee meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And with that, I will pass the microphone back over to Chair Carey.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bollinger. It looks like the rest of the agenda is Ron here for R277-600? He's online. My thinking is and I'll ask the board for its input on this. I think we take R27600 next. So Director Litchfield can get on with his day. And then the remaining items are all UPPAC related, and then we go there. Is there any objection with that proceeding in that order? Okay, if not, Director Litchfield, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Board Member Carey.
And Deputy, are you queuing this up? Who is queuing up? Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. So this is R277-600. This is the Student Transportation Standards and Procedures. There are amendments in your backup. We've got a draft 1. This item was brought to this committee at the request of 3 or more members of the board, and the recommended action is to approve draft 1. The changes that you'll see in draft 1, there's really 2, and we can speak more to that. The first is including a definition of the child access routing plan, and that is because it's referred to in one of the changes below. So we'll skip down. Another change that you'll see is just clarifying, and this was brought to the attention of board members from staff, clarifying the grade 6 students attending middle school. That's kind of a gray area in the transportation, so we wanted to make that extra clear for LEAs. But then the change brought by board members is on line
193.
193, thank you, Chair. Stating that an LEA shall include notice on their website that bus stops and the child access routing plan that's defined up above may not or might not take into account the location of registered sex and child abuse offenders. So those are the changes we're looking at today. 193.
And then Vice Chair Bollinger, I am one of the 3 members, so this really is my
I was just going
matter.
to ask that.
So if you could handle this matter,
Yeah, so
chair this matter.
with that being said, now that we've heard kind of some background on it, Chair Carey, I'm going to let you speak to it since you are one of the signers to maybe help us understand the reasoning behind the changes.
Yeah, so this was brought to my attention by a group of parents who they had bus transportation provided for a long time, and then due to the way that the LEA was determining the distance between the LEA and the home, a portion of this community no longer had bus transportation provided. And they were given what we're now calling on line 33, the Child Access Routing Plan. And in there it talks about, and I think the Department of Transportation and Director Litchfield would know more about this, I think Utah's Department of Transportation refers to it as the Safe Route Plan. And the parents thought that was very misleading because they said the only issues they're pointing out are the ones that are visible. It's a high traffic area. We have to cross without a crossing guard. But the parents then began to use various apps and began to notice that along this route were several known sexual offenders who by law are required to register with the state. And they said to call this a safe route is very misleading. It's not. And they wanted just to make sure that moving forward, other parents, other individuals would know that, one, that it's not safe, and I think that's why this adjustment to a child access routing plan rather than adopting the moniker safe route, and then to make it incumbent on the LEA to include language that would let parents know that, look, when this plan is determined, that it doesn't take into account, it doesn't take into account that the location of the bus stop or the path that's being suggested does not take into account the location of registered sex and child abuse offenders. That's the history of the rule. The proposed changes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, any comments?
I would just ask if it's possible if we could hear from Director Litchfield.
Sure.
Much of my guidance came from him, so I wanted to make sure, one, I didn't misstate anything, and then two, just a general overview for the board, for the committee.
Yeah, Director Lynchfield, would you want to help or speak to that?
Yes, so I am Ron Litchfield. I'm the transportation specialist here at the State Board.
One moment. We just can't hear you very well. I'm going to ask that we can maybe turn up the volume. I'm not sure if,
It's him.
I don't know if you can get closer to your microphone to help us hear you better.
Yeah, let me just talk a little bit louder. Is that better?
No.
We
No.
can barely hear you.
Just walk downstairs.
Okay, give me 1 second here.
Let's try again.
Yeah.
That is, no. Yeah, now we have some background noise. Let's try again. Go ahead.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
So much better. Thank you.
Oh, good. Sorry, I'm at a conference, and so I'm away from my normal desk with all my tools here. So, just to give you a quick update. First of all, my name is Ron Litchfield. I'm the transportation specialist at the State Board of Education, and I have been working with Board Member Carey on this bill and to really better understand the rules behind this. This is was at first kind of a little more challenging. The Safe Route to School Plan, which is a program that's adopted under UDOT and is in UDOT rules. And this is something that, we provide at USBE. Our schools are providing those type of plans to students. And they originally were called the Child Access Routing Plan. And UDOT has really been focused on infrastructure rather than human behavior challenges. And so I am working with UDOT, and we are looking at, what changes can be made on their end. But for our USBE rules, this was a good plan to share that information with parents that, bus stops and, that child access routing plan may not take into account those sex offenders and child abuse offenders. One of the more challenging pieces to that is there are over 20,000 new registrations every year, and so we have a population of sex offenders that are moving throughout the year and moving to different locations. And as many districts do provide, taking into account that location of a sex offender and try to place a stop where, school bus stop where there isn't a sex offender. That does happen, but it's hard to monitor because of those changes. So I think this is a good update to provide notes on the website and share that information with parents so they can also be involved in the safety of their students.
Thank you, Director. Member Lear.
I have a question about, and thank you for figuring out that sound issue. I have a question on line 82. And I want to make sure I'm reading it correctly, and then I also have a follow-up question. So my kind of understanding question is, it says the superintendent shall determine transportation eligibility, and then skip to grade 6, the new language, grade 6 students attending a middle school. So I'm concerned that there might be extra cost for LEAs who have to provide additional service for only students who are in the middle school who are in grade 6. Have you considered that or consulted LEAs about that, or what cost differential is it going to create for, and am I interpreting that correctly?
Director Litchfield.
All right, thank you. So this is actually a change in response to a legislative bill that was run last year. And last year, the bill was placed that we have a challenge at a lot of our middle schools where we provide transportation at 1.5 miles for K through 6. And then there's this transition at secondary. And the bill that passed specifically says if there's 6th grade students attending middle school, they're actually changing that eligibility measurement to 2 miles, which is more consistent with other students going to the same school. And that was the main conflict, was parents were allowed to send their 6th grader on the school bus, but weren't allowed to send their 7th and 8th grader on the school bus, and was creating conflicts with parents driving and wanting their kids to ride the school bus. So this affected 73 schools in the state of Utah, and actually didn't have any increase of costs. It may have reduced some costs.
Right.
So this change is just updating that sentence to meet the new law.
Okay. So to follow up, what you're saying is we, A, have no choice, which is, I understand. And I think I was interpreting it backwards. So really what the message is sixth graders who attend middle school are going to be treated just like other middle school students. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And Director, I do have a few questions on this. I served on the community council. I know this is one of the topics that they cover on the school community council. I did that at my son's middle school and high school, and as well as the elementary. And I do know that they do call them safe walking routes. And in fact, the website is saferoutes.utah.gov. And as I've looked at some of our schools, I've just chosen different between charter schools and LEA district schools. A lot of times they're just linked directly to that website, right? They're required to have the safe walking routes on the website, but this is where they put it. And not that I have a problem with aligning it with the code, because I've seen that that's where it's aligned. But would this require schools to, and as they're working with their local police and UDOT, to change the names specifically and all the documentation, and UDOT to require them to change the website, or is this just to align with the wording and code? If you could address that, Director Litchfield.
Okay. Yes, thanks. So as far as district sharing information, on the district side, we would want, notice on their websites or on the papers that they distribute that this may not account for location of registered sex or child abuse offenders. I am currently working with UDOT, and one of the discussions I've had with their director is the possibility of using their GIS map system, which prepares those maps for the school, and actually have a button that you could press to overlay sex offenders along that route so that parents are informed another way. And they are also looking at, hiring a human behavior specialist to be on their UDOT team. And so this is challenging because we do refer, parents to, UDOT, and it's under UDOT's rules that they're providing that school routing access plan. And so I think continuing to work directly with them. I've also been working with Department of Corrections to understand better, challenges with how sex offenders register and move in and out, and how that would impact, our school transportation routes. So I think for now we're just updating this on our end, and then we will continue to work with UDOT to see if we can be able to share information better with parents that, there may still be hazards, and specifically these hazards with sex offenders and child abuse offenders.
Thank you. One other question, as I'm reading the language, if we can slide down to line 193. Just a question on how it reads currently. So an LEA shall include notice on their website that school bus stops and the child access routing plans may not take into account. Does that mean that they can't take that into account? And I don't know if Deputy Superintendent Nui can help us understand that. I'm just wondering if I'm reading that, if I'm just reading into that, or you can help me understand that.
Yeah, so the intent was that the may is they could or they could not. However, I do think that there could be confusion given that in rule writing language, when we say may not, it is almost always a prohibition. So I do think that wasn't the intent, and you could read it either way, but there could be confusion. So if we wanted to clear that up as a committee, that could be.
Okay, so with that, I would like to make an amendment to that. Director Rasmussen, if you can help me with some language there, I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. So
Do we want to say might not? Is that?
Chair Carey, I'm going to defer. Since I just want to make sure that we keep the intent, but I also don't want to put a prohibition into taking that into account.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And that is an excellent call out, because I understand exactly the discussion you had with Deputy Nui. The might not, I don't know if that has the same statutory implication as the may not.
May not is just the term that we use when you're telling someone you cannot do something. So might not is kind of more, might is not something that we normally use in rule. It doesn't have a fixed meaning in rule that the may not has.
I'm not the one that's the lawyer here, okay?
We could say, just as an idea, that LEAs are not required to take into account these things and that be the notice. Might not would also, I think, work. It's not one that we usually use, but I think it would get across the meaning better.
I mean, I like the might not, and then we would have the 30 days to have, well, the board and staff could look at this and maybe come up with better language, but I think the might not works and addresses that primary concern. But while that's being made, may I just share one of the reasons that we didn't get into, because Director Litchfield did say that, yes, there's some districts that do, and there's some charters that do. The concern was the legal liability once we start saying that a district does take this into effect, and you have these individuals moving all the time. And so that's why we went with the more encompassing language.
And I appreciate that clarification because you're right, there's a lot of other unintended liabilities that could be put on districts. And because bus stops are hard to place, having to move bus stops all the time could have a lot of unintended consequences, because if we don't have control over where individuals live, then that makes it challenging. So I appreciate that clarification. Okay, with that, I would like to make a motion that the committee strike may not on line 194 and insert might not. Any other discussion to that motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. We're back to the underlying motion. Is there any further discussion to this motion? Okay, so the motion is that the committee approve R277-600 Student Transportation Standards and Procedures Draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously, and I will send the mic back to you, Chair Carey.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, really wanted to thank Director Litchfield. This, I think we've been working on this since May, which, well, may or may not, but it really amazing because the changes were not significant in terms of the volume of the rule, but just really trying to find the right space. I want to thank Director Litchfield for his help, and also UDOT, just their willingness to work with Director Litchfield and his concerns. That's been a very, very positive experience. So thank you, sir. Okay.
Thank you, Board Carey.
Yep. Let's move on to let's do this. Let's take why don't we just take a 7-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll delve into UPPAC. Thank you. let's bring everybody back. Are we online? Okay. Thank you. We are, thank you. So let's bring everyone back and we'll start. The remaining items on the list are items 1.4, item 1.5, item 1.6, and item 1.7. After speaking with Director Rasmussen with the consent of the committee, Director Rasmussen thought maybe starting with 214, items number 1.6 and 1.7.
I think those will go quicker than the other two.
Just because they're easier rules. So I'm willing to move down that road. Is there any concern with that? If not,
I don't know that I have a concern. I am just convinced and hope that as we consider these rules, and I absolutely understand that the continuation is necessary, but I hope we also keep in mind that we'll be discussing all of the UPPAC procedures holistically in the next few months. And I don't want to start down paths of more technical amendments that would not be consistent with a more comprehensive discussion. So, I more think it wouldn't be a very productive use of our time. But I also think all of these things, many of these things relate to the other rules and issues. So I just hope we don't spend a ton of time with tedious amendments. Rather, fact-finding, question asking, that kind of stuff is my preference.
thank you, Member Lear. So I have 44, no. So what? Yeah, right. And then subpart A, B, C, and D. So, I agree that, this is very fortuitous in the sense that these rules, we didn't pull them or staff didn't pull them. They're just coming up on their 5-year review. I agree that we should really use this as an opportunity to better understand the processes and procedures. I am not in a position to dictate whether or not you can or should not make a motion. I am considering one or two, but the guidance is prudent that the vast majority of the time should be spent better understanding what we're going to be looking into over the next 90 days or so. So with that, Director Rasmussen, you're going to queue us up for a 214?
Sure.
R277214?
So, like you said, R277214 is approaching its 5-year review. This is the rule that sets forth the procedures that we follow if an educator has, or a prospective educator has a hit on their BCI background check, or so it basically just walks through what's required, what are the standards that we employ. There's a section on the hearing process if they want to challenge the board's determination on their pre-licensure background check. So I have made a few technical edits in each of these rules, tried to do nothing substantive, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the background check process and go from there.
Not seeing any lights, I'll take the lead on questions. And are there any permanent prohibitions, meaning if we see this on your background check, you're not going to be considered, even if that matter was 20 years ago, even if you were a teenager when that offense took place? Are there any blanket prohibitions like that in our rule?
There is a statute that we have basically incorporated in the rule, if I remember correctly, that says that has a list of things that are bars to getting your educator license. And that's all your sex offenses, your violent felonies, things like that. And then we have, and so we basically follow that as the ones that are permanent bars to getting a license.
Please.
Do you know if that's in the authorizing statute that's listed, Ben, that 6603? Is that where that
That
list
would
is?
be the statute.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, on line 89 is one of the statutory prohibitions. It says for 3 convictions, and then it gives some parameters around the timing of those convictions. Is that also from the statute, and does that act as a permanent bar? Could you, because I didn't fully understand lines 89 through 94. If you
No,
could,
that does not come through from statute. That's been basically in place longer than I've been here, as far as I can remember. But basically, it's how we look at that is primarily applying to misdemeanors. That we're saying if you have three convictions, you have to wait a certain number of years before you can get your educator license.
okay, thank you. And Member Lear?
Oh, no, sorry.
Yep, I'm going to give the committee just a few more minutes to look at the rule to see if there's any questions. And then if, please let me know. And then Director Rasmussen, as you have had the opportunity of working with this rule and its application, do you see any areas that you would recommend that as a committee we look at or that we consider for review?
I mean, I think the one thing that you could consider that would be a legislative ask, I know that we've had discussions, and I've talked to the superintendent about this in the past. There was actually a bill proposed a couple of sessions ago that was proposed late, and so it didn't go far, but it kind of put a cutoff on how far back we were looking at some minor cases like misdemeanors and things like that. I mean, I think the board and the legislature could consider how far they want us to be looking back at things like a misdemeanor bad check charge or a retail theft charge, things which are obviously problems, but it's just a question of how long do you want to hold that against someone. You know, we go back sometimes, we look at offenses, we've had offenses pop up from the 60s that show up on BCI, and you know, at some point whether they wrote a bad check in 1969 probably isn't a concern to the board, I would guess. But so I think that's something that could be considered, is whether you want to look at curtailing the number of offenses we review.
So, Director Rasmussen, you see this pop up from the 1960s or 1970s. What obligation are you under by statute or rule when that happens? Is it just something you have to factor in? Or are you required to investigate?
So for each charge that we get a hit on, we ask for a written explanation of what happened. We ask for a copy of the police report, and we ask for a copy of the court docket. For most cases that are that old, the police report and court docket have been expunged, and so we have to get letters from those agencies saying we don't have those records anymore. And it can be a little work, especially for something. I mean, 1969 is an extreme example, but we do get a fair amount of things from the early 90s, I think would be examples to where it can be hard to get the records and maybe of limited relevance to the licensure.
Well, let me just put on the record that 1969 is not that far back. Just letting you know that. But does anyone have any questions? If not, I don't see any lights, then
I actually changed my mind and had a more
Please.
general question. And you prompted me to think of this, Ben. I have thought, and I've talked to some, interestingly, in my current role, I've talked to more individuals seeking background check clearances than I probably did when I was in a role similar to yours. But I have had a number of people say that it seems like an inflexible and unrealistic standard to say if you have a lesser, and I don't, you're going to way lesser. I into a shoplifting charge or a retail theft as shoplifting or misdemeanor offenses, that it's unrealistic if that happened in California or Ohio or North Dakota to wait and get their attention and get a letter from that office that says, yes, this is true and blah, 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 blah. I would like to see, and I think it could be done by rule. I don't think there's any need to do it by legislation. I would like us to think about, and I don't have language today because I was thinking in a more holistic process. I would like us to think about a time limit that and I don't know if this would, I don't know if it's even possible, because I don't know if we could list every offenses for which we mean this applies, but if we could come up with some time limit, if it's more than 15 years old or something like that, and it is a Class B misdemeanor, or less, and something like that, then, and letter of explanation from the individual is sufficient. And then that shifts the burden to us to say, if you don't like the letter of, or to our staff, to say, if you don't like the letter of explanation from the individual, then we can have a little more clout to pursue that with the powers that be. Because I've heard from a number of people seeking licenses that getting a police department in Los Angeles to care about your plight is just more than we should be asking. So that's a general sort of long-winded comment that I would like to look at that for the future. And maybe we can talk about what that time period should be and what the kinds of offenses should be.
Yeah, the California especially just likes to be difficult as they can
Terrible.
be.
And
We had a bill, like I said, a couple sessions ago that was actually a pretty good start on that, and actually we worked with them on a list of what that might look like. It was kind of proposed late in the session, so it didn't go anywhere, but I think we could probably start with that language if we wanted to work on something like that.
And if your office had some discretion so that you could say, yes, there were 2 drunk driving charges, not a thing you like in a teacher. But if it happened and this is where it gives you some flexibility, which you kind of want and don't want, when the person was 19 and 21 and he's had nothing else since then. And it was 15 years ago. I think you can evaluate that. And
I've looked at whether we could put some of that flexibility in rule as the law stands right now, and I don't think we can the way the law is written. So I do think we need some legislative changes on that particular one, just because the way the law is written, it says the state board shall basically consider everything on the background check. And,
well, then we maybe need.
So I do think some legislative
and
flexibility
give
would
some
be good.
discretion to either UPAC or to the executive director would be my preference on this, because interestingly, that's the complaint I've heard the most about this process, not how did you let this person sneak in and get a license?
Yeah.
And especially, okay, one more thing, we are doing background checks on all of Western Governor's candidates. So those people rarely stay in Utah, and that might be an exaggeration, but there are hundreds of them, and they go all over the country, and so the burden becomes ours to do that background check. And that makes it onerous for the individual, and it makes it onerous for our staff without some more realistic guidelines, I think, or direction, not just guidelines. Thanks.
Yeah, this is something I worked on when I was on the board. The legislator that was particularly interested in it is no longer serving in legislature. I personally had a couple of incidences at my own organization where there was an individual that something happened when they were a teenager, and they were trying to dig out those records, and it needs work. So it would be of interest if a board member was interested that when we talk about legislative asks, that someone, if one of you or somebody was interested, I would be really excited to pick that back up. We got really far. In fact, I think it's already drafted. It just needs a champion. Yeah, and it just simply ran out of time. So that would be something we would be excited to pursue.
Superintendent, so that legislation is drafted or proposed legislation?
It was introduced 2 years ago, I think. So yeah, there's a numbered bill that we could copy and start with.
Upon direction of the board, we would then resurrect that and then find a legislator that's currently serving that might be interested in it.
Now, there's no objection from the committee. Could you just supply that to the members of the committees for us to take a look at, which would help us evaluate whether or not the committee or other board members want to move that forward? You know, Director Rasmussen, I do have a question, and it begins on line 78. And it talks about, well, before we get there, let me go to line 71. And here it says, the executive secretary shall forward the following criminal background reviews to UPAC, which shall make a recommendation to the board for final action. So can you walk this committee through that process? You serve as the executive secretary, you conduct a criminal background review, and then it says, forward the following criminal background reviews to UPAC. So if any of these matters pop up, it sounds like there's an affirmative obligation on your part to get these to UPAC. And when we say reviews to UPAC, what do we mean?
So it might help if I just explain the process just a little bit so you understand how that works. If we get a hit on an individual's background check that is pre-licensure, we send them a letter. They have to supply, like I say, a letter of explanation, a police report, and a court docket. Once we have those, this rule then explains where I route that to. For some offenses, I send those directly to the board. You see those on the consent calendar that say, you know, what the educator did, that they've taken care of the court case, and rule says they can proceed if you're okay with it. There are some that are more recent or that are more serious that I take them to UPAC first. And so this is a list of things that has to be reviewed by UPAC before they can go to the board.
So when you say the board, I understand what that means because I live in this space. When you say you take it to UPAC, what does that mean?
So in UPAC, when we have these, we have usually 2 or 3 of these a month that go to UPAC first. Basically, I review with them the facts of what happened, and I say, you know, this is what happened. They've taken care of the court case. Are there any concerns about forwarding this on? It's not a long process, but we do go through the facts and let them know what the expectation is.
And, sorry, when you say UPAC, are you referring to the commissioners that head UPAC up?
No, this goes to the full commission.
It goes to the commission. And when they consider this, do they vote on it just like we would in board meeting, like in a regular board meeting? How does that?
So the procedure that we've adopted is they would basically just make a motion to accept the recommendations on background checks, and then that would be voted on.
Okay. And then let me go to lines 43 and 44. So these things pop up on the background check. You follow your procedure, so you write the applicant and you're like, hey, there's this issue from 1974. You've got to provide this information.
Yes.
Because on lines 43 and 44, it says it is the applicant's sole responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So they do their best. They're trying to become a licensed teacher. They move heaven and earth to get that docket number or the ticket. They can't do it. What happens at that point?
Well, I mean, if they can't get the docket or the police report because it doesn't exist, we just need a letter from the agency saying this doesn't exist. We require that in all cases. It does take a little work, but I don't think we've had any case where they really can't get that letter, or at least, I mean, because basically every state has a public records law that you can fill out a request and the agency has to give you a written denial if they're not going to give you the records. And so we just, at a minimum, we require the grandma denial or the FOIA denial from the other state. And so, I mean, we haven't really had a case where I would say that the person just can't get something that explains why the record doesn't exist.
And when
It might take a little time, but they can get it.
is UPAC doing this or is the applicant doing this?
The applicant has to do this. My assistant coordinates all this. She does the interface with the applicants.
And on average, how often does this issue occur where records past a certain amount of time, whatever that is, are just simply not available? Then they have to go to phase 2 and get this record doesn't exist letter.
Quite frequently, I think most states have laws that after 5 or 10 years, they destroy police reports, police records, or some even court dockets. So in a lot of the cases that we have, we're basically going off the letter.
So you don't have any official documentation other than this letter saying this record no longer exists. You then require the applicant to explain what
rely
happened.
on their explanation.
Okay, thank you. Then just going over to line 71, these are the things that could pop up on the background check that require you to follow certain procedures. Line 71 says any offense involving children in any way. And so we're not limiting it to criminal or civil. If there's an offense,
Well, it would be criminal, because this only applies to criminal offenses, because it's what pops up on a criminal background check.
oh, it does say the following criminal background reviews.
Yes,
So this is just criminal.
yes.
Okay. Do you see any need to expand that to civil?
Not unless you give me a lot more money to look into these things. I do not.
Okay. I mean,
And I have a question to that point specifically. Amanda's been waiting, but
yeah, so can you see any scenario where having additional information on civil offenses may help better protect our students by keeping certain educators out of the classroom or potential educators?
I would not think that I would go there. I think that would be a big expansion of what's expected and would be pretty unprecedented.
And does the statute just say criminal?
Yes.
Thank you. Member Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. And if Member Lear's question is to this current topic, I can wait for just 1 minute, if that up to the Chair. No, please.
my point or my question was, and I'm not sure whether we should or should not refine this. Let me be clear about that, because it certainly, screams concern. However, you could have an offense that was domestic violence in the presence of a child. That is criminal. Maybe happened when individuals were in their 20s, their early in a marriage maybe, and not to belabor that, but that kind of thing seems the kind of example that I was talking about earlier. If that happened 20 years ago and the individuals had no concern since then, that seems unnecessary and perhaps onerous to have a letter of explanation or a letter from some remote. And it doesn't matter if it's remote or not. I mean, North Sanpete could maybe, if the police department or the sheriff's office doesn't have any better records or harder to get than maybe Los Angeles. So I just that's the kind of example that I would like to at least rethink and discuss. Because not every, sorry, I keep doing that to you. Not every offense involving children in any way they're not all created equal.
Thank you. Board Member Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question to Director Rasmussen. Director Rasmussen, just for the public knowledge, because we keep talking about UPPAC, and many of us may understand what that means. Can you tell us more specifically of what that, when we say UPPAC, how many people are there? What does that look like? How are they chosen? Just for some background knowledge, because we're going to be talking about these UPPAC rules and keep saying we're sending it to UPPAC, but there may be people that don't understand that.
Yeah, the Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission is what UPPAC stands for. It's created by statute. They're all appointed currently by the superintendent. There are 9 licensed educators on the commission. 6 of those have to be classroom teachers. 3 of them are licensed educators in other capacities, currently an HR administrator, a RESA director, and a charter school assistant principal. And then we have 2 community representatives on this commission as well. Those are recommended by the PTA. So we have 11 total on the commission, and when we talk about UPPAC, that's who we're talking about. They serve 3-year terms. They can serve up to 2.
Any other questions? If not, we're ready for a motion on this rule. Board Member Lear, you have your light
I'm
on.
happy to do that. I move that the committee continue and approve R277-214, Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission, Criminal Background Review, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277-214, Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission, UPPAC, Criminal Background Review, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. Does anyone wish to speak to that? I just want to note for the record that, and this is really for clarity purposes, that I would ask that those who may be watching or watch in the future, just because motions are not being made at this time, I want to stress that the board has asked this committee to do a review of UPAC in its totality, and that even though members of this committee may have motions that they would like to make, understanding the bigger nature of the review, they may not be making those motions at this time, waiting for that review to be complete, but they are free to do so if they would like. And with that, all those in favor? Aye. That motion passes unanimously. If we could now proceed to item 1.7 on the agenda, R277216, surrender of license with Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission, investigation pending. And with that, Director Rasmussen, do you want to cue us up?
Yeah, so this again is up for 5-year review. This is the rule that basically sets forth the requirements if an educator who's under investigation just is done with teaching and wants to give up their license, sets up what is required in their petition and just kind of the procedure for reviewing that. If an educator surrenders their license under this rule, they are permanently barred from having a license. They can't ever have it reinstated. So we do this a fair amount when educators are just through with teaching, and it helps with our caseload a fair amount. So happy to answer any questions you have about it.
Seeing no lights, I just have two questions. If an educator comes before UPAC and they want to surrender their license, what makes that official? Is it this board's action, or when do we say that license has been not just tendered, but surrendered?
So they file a petition that conforms to this rule. I bring that to the board, and then this board just makes a motion to accept that petition.
And once the board votes to accept, is that when it becomes official?
Yes.
At any time prior to the board accepting the tender of that license, is the educator free to change his or her mind and say, you know what, I think I want to keep this and fight for it?
Yeah.
Okay.
They would still be under investigation, and we'd go through that process. But until the board acts, yes, they could withdraw it.
And then it sounds like you know where I'm going, Director Rasmussen, because my next question is, can someone tender their educator license in order to avoid having this board revoke it? So they believe, based on their own review of the rules and their understanding, they're like, if I try to fight this, I'm just going to lose my license. I'm going to voluntarily surrender it so the board can't take it. Do our rules prevent that from happening?
Well, I mean, they can do that, but it still has the same effect, because once you surrender that license, you're done. You can't come back. And so if that, it's not really an effective strategy if they're trying to keep the board from revoking it, because they can't come back to teaching.
Once they voluntarily surrendered, it's just as the same ramifications as if this board voted to revoke it.
Yes.
Superintendent,
I have a question. Is there a concern that somebody might do that in lieu of having something on their record, maybe in another state? Are you concerned, or is there a concern that action would bypass holding somebody accountable for record keeping in another state?
that was the next question,
Oh,
which was,
okay.
well,
Sorry.
but no, it's my understanding that in Utah, they can't come back. But I know that when we take an action, that's noted on various systems. But if they voluntarily surrender their educator license, how are those systems still updated to reflect that this board may have, and it sounds bizarre to put it that way, but is the system protected from such individuals who don't want that mark on their file?
Yeah, if you look at line 82, we still report the surrender to NASDAQ. And, we basically treat it as a revocation in every way. So most other states aren't going to give them a license because they're barred from having a license here.
Okay.
It's up to the other state, but that's how most states treat it.
Thank you. Member Lear?
it off. I'm remembering this, so I'm not positive it's still in place, but it used to be that those surrender agreements required the individual to state that he accepts or she accepts the, and I'm not going to say this well, but the statements of guilt as they're presented in the surrender document, so that the individual acknowledges that acknowledges that he did those things for purposes of the surrender. Is that still in there, Ben, or?
That was a requirement for a consent to discipline. It's not a requirement for a surrender because
That might be, again, thinking to the future, that might be better, a good language to add so that the individual's clear that if that individual tries to represent in another forum that he's licensed, that or that he did nothing wrong, that document exists, and if somebody's going to try and cheat and lie, maybe they're going to be able to escape that. But at least most states will discipline a teacher for lying on an employment application. So that might be something that would strengthen that a little bit without being too draconian.
I mean, a surrender is basically akin to a no contest plea, and if you were in court, I probably would not want to include something that requires an admission for that reason. We're not trying to make another state's case. We're trying to get them out of our schools and make it a simple process, I think. But I mean, it's something that could be considered.
Thank you. And I'm only just now thinking of it, so I'm not sure it's the best idea. But I do think that superintendent's point's well taken, that I don't want an individual representing to another state, even though they are not Utah kids, they're kids and they're children in public schools. I don't want an individual representing that there was no reason for that license surrender. It just was complicated. And I'm not also in favor of babysitting, so maybe there's a happy medium there.
Thank you, Member Lear. And again, Director Rasmussen, just because this is the process that we're going by, just more inquiry, I do have a question regarding these voluntary surrenders, because on line 78, it says upon receipt of a voluntary surrender of an educator license, the executive secretary shall, and then I think we're missing a word, but it says, this is line 78, whether the board required whether the board required UPPAC to continue the investigation. So as
you have to read 76 before 78. So notify the educator whether the board required UPPAC.
So, and this is where the timing comes in. So this is after, I guess I'm confused because it says after the receipt of a voluntary surrender. So they come in and say, I want to surrender my license. When does that surrender become effective?
When the board accepts the surrender.
So we accept the surrender, and then, well, it says upon receipt of a voluntary surrender, notify the educator that the voluntary surrender will be reported, but then whether the board required UPPAC to continue the investigation. Can you walk me through the timing? How would that work, because the voluntary surrender doesn't become official till this board acts? So we can say, yes, we accept it, but we're directing the executive secretary and UPPAC to continue their investigation?
I'm trying to just looking at the rule really quick. That comes after the board. That comes at, I think it's the intent is that would go to the educator after the board acts, and so it may be something that we need to look at how that's written in the future or at some point. But I think the intent is that would be in the letter where I notify the educator that the board has accepted the surrender and it's done.
But it also notes that, but we're requiring UPPAC to continue the investigation. Under what scenario do you see that taking place where the educator says, I'm tendering it, my license, the board accepts it, and then the board says, but Director Rasmussen, you keep investigating. Has that happened? What scenario are we?
No, and quite frankly, I think that's kind of an odd part of this rule. Back when this was first passed, there was some discussion about whether there would be cases when an educator was accused of something very serious that we want, and that they were just surrendering to keep the truth from coming out. And they wanted there to, I think there was some desire to have a mechanism that we could keep looking into the facts if it were appropriate. And so there is provision in this rule that basically allows us to keep investigating something if the board directs it. In most cases, we know enough about what's going on when the educator surrenders that we can accept their surrender and call it good. But there is a mechanism that if that was something that the board wanted UPPAC to keep looking into, the board could order that.
And
It has never been used.
the notice that that there, and this is line 82, and I reach out on this because I had an educator who went through UPPAC actually reach out to me after the fact and talk about this, that the voluntary surrender will reported to, is that NASDAQ?
NASDAQ, yeah.
NASDAQ. Could you help me and the committee better understand what does that mean or entail?
NASDAQ is an organization that is comprised, it's an agreement between all 50 states. Many school districts have access to the database now, but every state in the union has agreed to report their educator licensing actions to NASDAQ. And that's why we report the surrender to that agreement, and we periodically check that to see if our licensees have had issues in other states, and other states can check and see what we've done.
And to be clear, I'm all for that. I think that's a great idea. My concern is that it appears that we're notifying the educator that this is going to happen only after the tender of their educator license has been accepted by the board.
If you look in the requirements for their petition, one of the things they have to put in the petition is that they understand that it will be reported to NASDAQ.
So why then are we telling them after they've voluntarily tendered their license, we've accepted it, and we're just telling them again? Is that what you're saying?
It's just confirming your license is done. We're reporting this to NASDAQ as we said we would. It's just being very transparent and thorough.
And that's what I appreciate, and that's what I think due process demands. So where in this rule or other rules does it say, does it allow the educator to know the consequences of what could happen when they come and say, I want to surrender my license? When are we notifying them of these same provisions?
So there's a list. I think Elise has it on, or Deputy Superintendent Newey has it highlighted there in the rule of the things that they have to attest to when they're surrendering their license. That's in the rule. And so they have to, usually this is something where we send them a draft document that my attorneys have prepared that includes all this. And so they can review what's going to be expected before they sign that. And so it's in the rule and it's in the document they sign before the board approves it.
I'm just going to read this right now, but if there's any other questions, please put your light on. I just want to make sure I can read this. Yeah. So again, and maybe I want to make sure that, because at the end of the day, whether it's a minor infraction or it's something absolutely reprehensible, the individual's entitled to due process. So I want to make sure that we are affirmatively providing notice of these things. As I understand it here, it's saying they have to attest that they understand these potential consequences. Are we affirmatively giving them documentation that says, if you take this step, the following might happen. And we list these out for them to see, or are we just having them attest to, you understand that all these things could happen? Does that make sense? One is they're affirming their understanding. The other puts the onus on us to make sure that we are doing more than asking if they understand. We're providing documentation to that effect.
I'm not sure what other documentation you'd be expecting here. Essentially, what happens is the attorney that's assigned to the case would go to the educator's attorney, and say, these are your options. Surrender is one of them, and if they want to surrender, they'd send them this document that spells out their rights. They'd be told to read that document, and that explains to them what their rights are. And they have to waive those. So I'm not sure what else.
Okay, that's fantastic. So we are sending them documentation that lists that these are the potential
The
ramifications.
surrender is usually prepared by our office, and it spells all this out.
And could you provide a copy of that document? I assume it's a template.
Yeah.
Could you supply that to the committee just so that we can review it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't think. I have any other questions on this rule. Does the committee? Seeing none, we're ready for a motion,
I'd be happy to make a motion, Chair.
please.
All right, I'd like to make a motion that the committee continue and approve R277-216, surrender of license with Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission investigation pending draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. So the motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277-216, surrender of license with Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission, UPPAC, investigation pending, draft 1, on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. All those in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, now let's go back to Ben, would you suggest we just go back to 1.4? Okay, so let's go back to 1.4. This is R277-212, UPPAC hearing procedures and reports. And then Director Rasmussen, if you just want to give us an overview of this rule and some of the procedures.
So this basically explains how the UPPAC hearing process works. It goes through selecting a hearing officer, selecting a hearing panel, what happens if there are conflicts with either the hearing officer or the hearing panel. It goes through how evidence is received in a hearing, certain deadlines, and kind of how the board reviews the hearing report afterwards. And then finally, the final section deals with just kind of if the board wants additional evidence after the hearing process is complete. So it's a long rule, but happy to answer any questions about that, how that hearing process works for you.
Member Bollinger?
Thank you, Chair. Just have some questions, Director Rasmussen, on just probably process more for public understanding and for the understanding of the committee as we work through these. On lines 24 and 25, it talks about how the executive secretary shall appoint a hearing officer from among a list of hearing officers identified by the state procurement process and approved by UPPAC. Can you talk us through a little bit about what are the requirements for somebody to be a hearing officer? I mean, I don't need like a detail, but just like the overall process of what that looks like. Can anybody apply for it? Is it we put out RFP? Can you just speak to that?
Yeah, we do an RFP. We require them to be a licensed attorney in the state of Utah. And then we're basically looking for somebody that understands state administrative procedures, that's ideally has had experience as a hearing officer, ideally has had experience with UPPAC or licensing type issues. We have that process will be coming up again next year, but we do an RFP.
And to follow up on that, does anything preclude attorneys that are, let's say, because we know that educational law is very niche, right? Does it anything preclude somebody that's hired as maybe a attorney for a district or a charter school from applying to be a part of or be a hearing officer?
The only thing that we have barred in the past is that if they actively take cases representing educators in UPAC proceedings, they can't be a hearing officer. We do have a couple of our hearing officers that are attorneys for school districts. We basically work under the notion that if we have cases from their districts, we won't assign them those cases.
So you address if there's a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Okay, another follow-up, if I may. One of the other things I had a question on is, as far as an educator that's being brought up, so on line 173, it says the name of a person who will represent the party at the hearing. This is just, can you help us understand how, I know that you've given us statistics before on how many individuals or educators have representation. I've heard from a few people that say that those that are members of maybe like a teachers union are not represented by attorneys of the teachers union, that doesn't exist. Is that true, or do unions help support educators in this process?
So UEA generally will provide an attorney if their member is facing UPAC action. That's part of the member's rights, as I understand it, by being a member of UEA. And they have a handful of attorneys that they have on retainer or on contract to work with those educators.
And if an educator, I know that they can represent themselves, so they don't have to have an attorney. If they do choose to have one, then it's really up to them to retain an attorney. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions at this moment.
So Director Rasmussen, just a few questions, just generally. So 212 really covers the hearing procedures and reports. The hearing actually comes towards the end of the UPAC process, right?
Yes.
So I want to cover those things that happen before the hearing. How do we get there? And that starts with the intake. So you receive a complaint. Walk this committee through that process. So you get a complaint, let's say it's from an LEA. What are the next steps in that system?
So that's basically all outlined in our 277-211, but I'm happy to walk through that process. Basically, after we get a complaint from an LEA or from anyone, basically we take all the materials. Those are reviewed by UPAC. They make a determination whether to open a case. If they open a case, we assign it to an attorney on the UPAC staff to look into.
So you say it's
and prepare a report.
I'm sorry, Director. You said it's reviewed by UPAC. Again, what is that? All the commissioners? Is that a select group? Who? When you say
all 11 members of UPAC are given the materials. Yes, we have a monthly meeting where we review all the new cases, and they are given the materials ahead of the meeting, and most of them read every page of it.
what is their charge? Like they're reading it to decide what?
So they're reading it to determine whether or not we should assign an investigator, whether it's worth the resources. In our 277-211, there's actually a list of things that they're supposed to consider when they're determining whether to prioritize a case for investigation. But basically, most of the time, from what I've seen, they will open a case if they think the standards have been violated. They don't turn down a lot of cases where it looks like the standards may have been violated.
And is that an actual vote that takes place, or is that we have a consensus that we want to move forward?
We've started a procedure where they're actually making a motion. We go through basically determine what we're going to do, and they make a motion on the consensus. So we do take a vote.
And when did that practice start?
A month ago.
And when that vote's taken, is it like at this board where someone can look up and see these people voted for, these people voted against?
Yep, I've directed my assistant to record that in the minutes.
Okay. And then at this time, the information that you're reviewing is coming from where? So you present this information, these materials, I think you said, to UPAC. where are these materials being gathered from? Has UPAC done any type of independent investigation or review of the allegations?
Depends on where we get it from. If we get it from the LEA, I don't usually do a lot of added investigation. If it's something that we get like a parent referral or a hotline complaint, I usually will send a copy to the LEA and ask for feedback of some sort from the LEA, say we're going to review this with our commission, welcome any evidence you can provide before we do that. So I do try and get perspective from the LEA if we get a parent referral.
Okay, and what if it comes from the LEA? Is the parent provided that equal opportunity are they being reached out to respond or provide information?
If there were a parent involved, not generally. Generally, I guess it would depend on what was there from the LEA in the packet. Usually their packet will talk about how the parent has responded and what the parent has said. I mean, that's something that we would generally leave to the investigator to do after we open a case.
So just general, and I see board member there, so I'll let her jump in, but so generally what percentage of these matters where the LEA has brought the UPAC matter, and I see why parent wasn't the right go-to in my example, but thank you for that. What percentage estimation do you believe where the LEA has brought the UPAC complaint that you're reaching out to the respondent?
We don't reach out to the respondent until we open a case in most circumstances.
And in those matters where the entity or individual bringing the UPAC complaint is not an LEA, what percentage of those matters is the LEA contacted at this stage to provide information?
I try and let the LEA know every time.
Well, is it just letting them know, or are you requesting information?
I send them an email that says we've received this complaint. I'm going to review it with UPAC on this date, and I would appreciate any background information you can provide.
And you're doing that because you think that but based on your review of the information provided, that it's deficient, that they're not addressing certain issues. Why are you reaching out to the LEA in that manner?
Just so that UPAC has a full picture.
But where the LEA files it, are you reaching out to the respondent?
No. What the LEA sends us usually has how the respondent has responded. They've usually interviewed the respondent, and they usually provide us a statement from the respondent. Not 100% of the time, but it generally has been more thoroughly investigated by the LEA in those circumstances.
And Director, is that just a template that you use, or is that drafted specifically to a particular matter?
No, I make it up each time usually.
Nope, that makes sense.
Probably ought to come up with a template, but no.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Lear.
I had a couple of comments and clarifications maybe on in this section. First of all, I think it's important to note, and this is something that sort of I go over in my mind every time this issue comes up for discussion. Initially, before UPAC investigate, or before there's an investigator assigned, but when UPAC is determining whether or not a case should be opened, I think it's important to note that there needs to be a balance on the executive director's part, because you don't want to bring too much information to the commission before they've decided to investigate, because it is mostly one-sided at that point, and so you want to leave room in their heads and in the process for them to look at this objectively. So that's something that Director Rasmussen just has to get good at, to give them enough information to decide if an investigation is warranted, but not so much, because as you point out, Chair Carey, at that point the complainant's not, or the person complained against, the respondent's not been consulted. So you don't want to prejudice the commission with too much information. So I think it's important to note that some information is good, and it's as much art as science. My second point is kind of the same, is similar in that you don't reach out at that point or contact the person who's complained against, because you don't yet know if it's going to be investigation. And then thirdly, I have sort of a personal concern that these cases, and you got very close to it, Chair Carey, but didn't quite ask the question that I was maybe hoping you would, and that is that these investigators should be and are indeed investigators. They're not at this point prosecutors. They should be looking to see if anything has taken place. They shouldn't be saying, I'm a prosecutor working for the state who's going to prove what I've heard is the case. I think it's really important, and that's why I'm always very conscious of using the word investigator as opposed to prosecutor until they are perhaps acting in that role in a hearing. So that one point. Going back to my previous point, I also wanted to say, I think in that legislation, we're now asking the legislature to rethink about every complaint. I think there was some language in that required the respondent to be notified if that complaint was received. In that statute, that was part of the problem. You're positive that's not the case? I don't have it in front of me right now.
The rule requires an LEA to notify the educator when they notify UPPAC, but I don't think the statute requires that. I may be wrong.
I just think if the statute requires that, despite the fact that it interferes a little with our process, we should be making sure that the respondent hears that. I'll find the statute, and looks like somebody's already looking, maybe Malia. No, who's ever moving that? Who's ever the mystery person behind the, yeah, Lisa, you checking that statute? Because I thought that was one of my concerns. If someone is being complained against and every single tedious complaint is coming to UPPAC, I think that person should know about it. So if the statute doesn't say it, so sad, too bad. If it does, I think we need to be consistent with that statute.
Thank you, Member Leader. But to Director Rasmussen, if I could follow up, the rule that says the LEA must provide that notice, do you have that citation that you could send the committee to?
It's in R277217.
Oh, that's not,
Section, the very last section. I'm happy to send that if it would.
well, let's see if Deputy Nui can find the code. If not, let's go to 217 and read the rule, because both would require notification. So Deputy Nui.
Very last section, it's Deputy Superintendent. If you look in just the provisions on what is expected of the LEA, is my recollection. No, that's what they give to UPPAC. I think there's a provision that says they need to alert their educator. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. It's subsection 2, yeah. That's just in the case of parent complaints that are the unsubstantiated variety. Or the added.
Report every single.
I don't remember who ran that.
But is it fair to say that, do our rules require that UPPAC notify the respondent, regardless of who it is, once a UPAC complaint has been filed?
No. Well, once UPAC opens the complaint, opens a case, but not for cases we don't open.
Right. No, that I know. Once we open it, there's notification. What I'm asking though is if a complaint has been filed, not information provided, but filed, do we provide notice to the respondent?
No.
Okay. I imagine that at some point we have to, because they need to be aware of hearings and appear, if we decide to open it and move forward.
If we open a case, we send them all that, yes.
And so it's possible that a UPAC matter be filed, and if it won't be opened, the respondent who was named may never know about that if it's not opened.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any negative or derogatory effect from a UPAC case that has been filed but not opened that continues on to the respondent if it's not opened?
Those are classified as private. They're not shared with the public. So no,
Okay.
have no effect on their license.
Now, Ben, Director Rasmussen, that seems like I'm trying to think of other situations where you can bring an action against someone or want to bring an action and not notify that person. And I can't think of another scenario where the person named in the action is not actually provided notice that this has been filed. Why aren't we notifying individuals when a UPAC matter has been filed? Whether or not it's open, that's still a very significant, potentially life-altering, could have a life-altering impact on that individual. What was the rationale or the thinking as to why we're not going to provide notice to the respondent?
It's been the procedure since before I was here. I mean, I don't see that there has any impact on them unless we're actually going to look into it. The mere fact that someone has said something bad about them to the board, if it's going to be private and it's not going to be followed up on, doesn't have any impact on their license. I mean, if that's something the board wants us to do, that's something we can visit, but it's just never been done before.
Well, I take it back. I can't think of one other instance where an action actually can be taken against you and they don't notify you of it. And the one I can think of is like the no-fly list. Like they can put you on it and you just don't know until you go to fly. So I'm not saying that's the model that we should be looking at, but
We tell them if they're going to be on the no-teach list.
Not quite as much of a fundamental right as being able to hold it.
yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So let me just,
Joe, I have one
oh, please.
to that point. I just checked the statute, and I would agree with you, Ben, that it wasn't the case until one of the problems I had with this statute that was passed was the increased a problem and a fairness kind of issue at the same time. That when the statute was passed last year, I think it was last year, it might have been the year before, that then requires every complaint. So let me just read to you from 53E-6-601. Notwithstanding any other provision of this section, the state board shall make rules, blah, 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 that require an LEA to notify the state board, UPAC, and the educator of a complaint from a parent against an educator alleging a violation of educator licensing standards. So we should be notifying that educator when we should have rules that require the notification. Let me put it that way.
We do have those rules.
And then the educator should be notified when the complaint is received. And that's one of the things that concerned me about this statute that we're now asking the legislature to revisit.
Is this the code that Board Member Lear just cited? Because she cited 53E.
Yes, it is.
Dash 6-601, but what we're looking at is.
And it's -6-601,
That's a
parentheses 6.
That's a definition statute. That
No,
doesn't have 6 parentheses.
I may have got the code wrong. It is, I'm looking right, it's the very bottom of it. Oh, it is, I did lie, 6-604. 604. I'm sorry. And it's the very end of that whole statute, the last paragraph. Now, I guess we could get really ticky-tacky and say if the complaint doesn't come from a parent, then we're not required to notify the.
So I'm sorry, and I'm sorry that this may appear tedious because it is, but could you go back to 604? That require an LEA, notify the state board, UPPAC, and the educator. And just to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, the onus for that notification is on the LEA at this point. Is that
That's my
correct?
understanding.
That require an LEA to notify the state board, UPPAC, and the educator of a complaint from a parent against an educator alleging a violation of educator licensing standards. So the burden for notification rests with the LEA. And then it's my understanding, Deputy Newell, you're going to show where we now have that reflected in board rule?
But one thought related to that, Joe, what if it doesn't come through an LEA? What if it comes through the hotline? Is it silent so we don't do it, do we think? Is that what
That's
we're
a different
thinking?
circumstance.
No, but
Well,
but-
it's a complaint from a parent regarding a potential violation. It just doesn't come through an LEA.
no, and I agree that that's something that, letter of the law versus spirit of the law. And I think the spirit is they want parents notified. But if
No.
the LEA doesn't have the notice, then that probably should come from us, even though it's not technically required in the statute. So I guess my question is, and this would be for staff, right, so this appears to me to comply with code. Is that everyone's understanding? Wait.
The code was adopted to basically ratify this rule and make this rule permanent.
So we came first.
Yes,
Okay.
This was proposed by Chair Moss's work group that he had put together. As I recall, they kind of worked this out in the work group, and then they basically had the legislature rubber stamp it. Am I remembering that right, Elise?
I'm remembering that this expansion of it to any complaint came directly from the legislature.
Well,
I don't remember that anyone who's worked with this in this office said that every single complaint should be investigated.
Chair Moss initiated it.
I don't know if it went from Chair Moss to a legislator's ear to us, but I'm just saying it was not something that anybody who's worked with this thought was viable right in the beginning.
Okay, well, I appreciate everyone for that discussion. That was very informative. So, and I think that Board Member Lear brings out a good point about those complaints that are initiated through the hotline. And I don't see Debbie Davis here, but that would be an interesting question to see if what we're doing with those, again, spirit versus letter. Go ahead, Board Member Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. And as I'm reading this, I mean, we do know that when something gets sent to the hotline, the LEA has to be contacted specifically, which then would also trigger this, because if there's a director from a charter or a school that gets notified of a violation, then they would also have to notify the educator. So I do think that it's covered.
Tied together.
Yeah.
I would agree with that analysis. Thank you. And let me just go through a few more questions, and I appreciate the patience of the committee as we're wading through this. So the complaint is received, the 11 members vote on it. Now those 11 members are their votes recorded. They decide to move forward. What happens at that point? So now the decision's been made, we're going to open this UPAC matter. Director, walk us through that process.
An attorney is assigned to investigate the complaint. They collect evidence, talk to the parties involved, talk to witnesses, and they prepare an investigative report. That takes a number of months usually. Once the investigative report is prepared, they take that to the full commission again. And the full commission kind of gives an initial direction of where they think the case should go. They make a recommendation. There should be a reprimand, there should be a suspension, there should be a warning. And then the educator, the attorney would take it back to the educator if it requires their consent and say, this is the recommendation. You can either sign a consent to discipline or you can request a hearing. And that brings us into the rule we're talking about.
Okay, so let me just back up a little bit. You said they talked to the parties and the witnesses as part of this because you're not wearing the prosecutorial hat. Now you're wearing the investigator hat, right? You're doing an investigation. And I appreciate that distinction from Board Member Lear. So you're wearing this investigator hat. And when you said you talked to the parties and witnesses, is that obligatory? Is that in our rule or code that says you must talk to the parties, you must talk to the witnesses?
I mean, I'd have to look to see what the exact language is in 211, but basically it tells them to conduct a complete, thorough investigation, fair investigation, and I think that, I mean, the effort is to gather all the evidence, and so they talk to everyone that they think is relevant to the discussion.
So one of the concerns that I am hearing is that a party may list particular witnesses that they believe are significant, but those witnesses were not contacted as part of UPAC's investigation while they were wearing the investigator hat. Can you think of a scenario why that may not happen?
I would be interested to know who's alleging that, because no, I can't think of a circumstance where that would happen. My attorneys are not out to come to any specific conclusion. They're out to get to the truth, and so in my experience, they'll talk to anyone who has relevant knowledge to share.
And I would imagine that both parties are interested in establishing, they were right, and so they're going to list those witnesses that may be neutral, may be favorable, may be unfavorable. But in this role, UPAC is trying to get to the truth, trying to get down to what happened.
Yes.
And if you believe, your investigator believes that this individual has relevant information, it's your understanding they would be contacted.
They would reach out.
And I can understand if they list 52 kids, oh, that's a lot of kids on a bus. But if you have 10 kids on a bus, maybe you don't talk to all 15 kids because you talk to 5 and you're like, okay, we know what happened on the bus. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Does the investigator required to indicate why or why not they did or did not contact a particular witness listed by a party?
I mean, if there was a party that wasn't contacted, I think there would be discussion had between myself and the attorney as to that. I don't know that it would necessarily be indicated otherwise, but if they were having trouble reaching a witness or something like that, I think they would talk to me and we'd discuss whether or not they should proceed with the report before they could finish it up. But I can't think of a circumstance where they would just not contact people that they've been told have relevant information.
So as a general practice, if they're listed as a witness, they're contacted or attempted to be contacted?
They're either contacted or we go off their statements. Yes.
Okay. And if no statement was provided?
We would contact.
Okay. And then I see is this to this board
Yes,
member
it
there?
is. This
Okay,
very point.
please.
I think it is a really fair question to ask why witnesses were not contacted. On the other hand, it's different than a criminal investigation, though Ben points out that he has used subpoenas in the past. The investigators don't really have the weight of a badge or law enforcement who does criminal investigations. So I found many times, I would say, this is a guesstimate, but 30% of the time, there's a lot of mobility in schools, and that's increasingly true among teachers, among students, among families. So sometimes one party or the other, usually, unfortunately, the person complained against, the respondent, gives the names to the investigator and their number has changed. They've moved. The parent says, I don't want you talking to my 10-year-old. It's hard sometimes to get to all the witnesses. Plus the resources are more limited than the criminal justice system. But it's hard to get to the witnesses that sometimes and again, more often than not, the respondent offers. And then I found there was some reluctance sometimes by investigators. We don't really want to question 6-year-olds. If we can get information from the file, which is not always as complete as we'd like, because some school districts and some LEAs do better investigations than others, there's still a reluctance to talk to children, which might or might not help the respondent or might not help the state. So I think there are a lot of good reasons that some witnesses are not contacted or don't provide information for the respondent or for either party. Thinking there's another concern about this part of the process that, the investigative reports, I wish there was a little more detail, and I think they're generally good, especially considering the resources we have and the number of investigations. But I wish there was sometimes a little more information about witnesses that we weren't able to find, or witnesses we tried to contact, but the parent would not allow the child to speak to the investigator. So that would inform the board's decision sometimes, because sometimes it looks like, well, there was nobody that refuted this. Well, there's sometimes a reason for that. So I think that part of the process, we could maybe at least inform, if we can't do more about it, which is hard to imagine, we could at least inform the board for its decision-making purposes about some witnesses that were unavailable for various reasons. Also, students age out of the system when you have high school investigations. The seniors who were involved in some nasty situation, they've gone on to college and they either don't care, don't want to be found, or are not easily found.
Thank you. I see that CAE Davis is back in the room, and CAE Davis, we were discussing a provision in rule. Could we call that up, Deputy Nui? We were discussing a provision in rule that 2A. Are you familiar with that provision?
Okay, so if I understand correctly, the question is about if a concern comes in on the hotline and it's about a specific educator, are we what notifications are we making? So we would follow what's required in R277123, which gives kind of broad allowance for who we refer to. And because of this provision in rule, we essentially tell individuals, as long as they provide contact information, that we're essentially mandatory reporters. We have to report this to LEAs, and then we would let them take it from there as far as contacting educators, that kind of a thing, since we don't necessarily have contact information for all educators. But we do consider it a mandatory reporting, so we would inform a complainant, like, we have to report this, no matter if they want to stay anonymous or not. I mean, it's possible we could redact some information when we make the referral, but depending on the case circumstances, it might out them, I guess, if you want to call it that. But we do inform individuals we're mandatory reporters.
And even with mandatory reporting, whether it's to an LEA or child abuse related services, do we have any kind of follow-up with the LEA, or do we require them to contact us to make sure follow-up was made, or is it just we're doing our part, which is mandatory reporting, and then it's the obligation, in my opinion, as it should be, on those other bodies?
right? So if we refer to an LEA, and usually with educator misconduct, we're also referring to UPAC at the same time. So both of them would have the information. Under the most recently revised 123, of course, we are getting updates either every 45 days in general, or if it's prohibited discriminatory conduct, it would be every 14 days. So we would get an update that way, but it's not prescriptive about the information that we would receive, what they might tell us necessarily. So kind of at the discretion of the LEA, how they're responding using the form that we've set up.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Director Davis, CAE Davis? Okay, then I'm just going to expedite. I just have two more questions, if that's okay. But if you have questions, please. And this came up from Board Member Bollinger. This is on line 58. The Executive Tech Secretary shall select a hearing officer on a random basis from a list of available contracted hearing officers, subject to availability and conflict of interest. And Director Rasmussen, does UPAC have a written conflict of interest policy?
No.
So I absolutely think that that is something that this committee needs to address as part of our review and analysis. Let me... This is line 198, and I know we're skipping around. It says, an informant has no right to, and then A is individual representation at the hearing. And then I don't know if informant was ever defined, but could you tell us, is that just a witness? Like, what is... I know what an informant is, but in this context, what are we...
That would be a victim, that would be whoever has accused the educator of misconduct. So if we have a parent send in a complaint, they're not entitled to be represented at the hearing. Or if there's a victim, that would be who an informant would be, in my view.
So are we saying that they have no legal right to the state or the board paying for representation? Or are we saying they don't have a right to be represented?
To the state providing.
Okay, that's what I thought. So they certainly are entitled to representation. There's no right for us to pay for it.
Right.
Okay. And then the other thing, and this is lines 204 to about 223, it talks about discovery prior to hearing. So this matter has been opened. It doesn't look like it's going to resolve. And either party, the respondent or the informant, say, well, there's witnesses that we want to call, and we want to start taking depositions. Are depositions permitted under your interpretation and application of our UPAC rules?
We have done one deposition. It was a unique circumstance where we knew a witness was not going to be available at the time of the hearing. And so we did a deposition, but they aren't specifically, the rules don't specifically provide for that.
Okay, and it doesn't specifically prohibit that, right? And so if a party wanted to depose a witness or another individual, and they're not asking UPAC to pay for it, but they want to engage in depositions as part of the typical understanding of the word discovery in a legal context, are they able to do that under the rule?
The rule doesn't specifically provide for it. Whether or not that means that they're prohibited, I guess would be a matter for lawyers to argue. I think that might turn into, I don't know, I'd have to think about that.
Are you saying that a deposition may be what's defined in line 207 as unduly burdensome legalistic discovery?
Could be.
Okay. But we have permitted depositions in the past.
We have done one.
Okay. And in general, with any of this discovery, is the respondent, do they have to get approval for those discovery requests through UPAC prior to executing on them?
So the statute allows UPAC to issue subpoenas. So basically, if an educator wants to issue a subpoena, we generally just tell their attorney to draft the subpoena and I'll sign it. I sign it as executive secretary. but we don't really, they can basically subpoena whatever they want. We just have to issue it for them.
And at what point in the process are they permitted or entitled to ask you to issue subpoenas in their behalf?
Our practice has been as soon as we issue a complaint.
So once it's, yeah, that would make sense. Okay,
Quick question.
please.
Who enforces those? If the person says this is not from a court, this is not from somebody with a badge, who enforces those subpoenas?
So Elise has the statute on the board. Basically, the statute says that those can be enforced by a district court.
And how often does that happen?
It's never happened in the time I've been here.
Or when I was there? So there's
So it's
not,
probably never happened. Well, it's never been tried. I mean, it would take a lot of effort.
I think I did ask the AG's office one time, and that was once and only.
And so if you said once UPAC issues a complaint, and I want to make sure I understand that, because up to this point, the matter was filed with UPAC, let's say by an LEA. You've done your review. UPAC has voted on it. They've decided to proceed. Is that when the complaint would be issued by UPAC?
Yes.
And
If UPAC feels that an action is warranted or something against the educator's license that impacts the license, not a warning or something, but so if there's a reprimand or something greater proposed, then we would issue a complaint.
And at that point in time, either party is able to approach you and request that the subpoena be signed to be sent out.
Yes.
Okay. And then this is just line 245. And it says a hearing officer may exclude a person from the hearing room. Are these hearings still conducted in person, or are they done virtually now?
Most hearings are done in person, although we do take some virtual testimony.
Okay. And let me just ask, just because I'm curious, has this in your time at UPAC ever been necessary?
To exclude someone from the room? No.
Okay. Are there any questions, any additional questions, Board Member Bollinger?
Thank you, Chair. I do have a follow-up on line 114. This is to the point which I think is a fair point that Chair Carey made about making sure that we're clear on conflict of interest with a hearing officer. And I was asking Member Lear so it does say here that they have to a hearing officer has to recuse themselves for anything that would violate Utah rules of professional conduct consistent with Supreme Court rules of professional practice. And I don't know if that includes a conflict of interest or not, but that might be a place if we're looking in the future when we work on these rules to add clarity to that. Do we know if those rules specifically talk about conflict of interest?
You know, it's been a while since I've read them. I think it does, but
so that's something.
I mean, conflict of interest is one of the ethical principles for attorneys. And so
Okay, but I do.
That's been the guiding principle to date.
Yeah, but that conflict of interest might be worth clarifying. The other thing I had a question on, and this is more of like an AI thinking forward. Not that we need to make any changes, but just wondering and thinking as we move forward. On line 342, it talks about. In the context, it's talking about specifically from a student recording, but I just think in general, it talks about the recording is accurate and has not been altered, and each voice of the recording is identified. I know that there's a lot of things happening with AI and the ability to make deep fakes. So just wondering the capacity of our agency then, who would be responsible for verifying that the recording is accurate? And do we have the capacity to do that?
You know, that's a good question. That's language in the rule that's based on probably old court rules that were probably written before AI was a big thing. It's never really been an issue before. So, you know, that's probably for something we're thinking about. It might be something we could update as we're looking at this. But it is, like I say, it comes from court rules on taking this kind of testimony, and I don't know. I don't know how.
Not that you want to be in that business, but just something for
I'd
us
prefer to
to.
still use a rotary phone. AI is beyond me.
Thank you, Chair. That's all my questions.
Thank you. I just have one other one. I thought I read somewhere that it says hearsay evidence is permitted or hearsay material. I thought there was a line that, but I should have flagged it. I don't, and it might not be this rule, but I thought it was.
It is.
Oh, here it is. No, it's not. What, do you know the line? To
Probably in section 6.
Oh, it's 285. Is this, thank you, Elisa, that's what you said? It says a hearing officer may not exclude evidence solely because the evidence is
There you go.
hearsay.
Yes.
So could you walk me through an example of that?
We take a lot of written statements from students or people at the school level that have been procured in school investigations that are admitted in hearing if they have proper foundation and if we have enough other evidence to support them. We have a lot more flexible evidentiary standards currently in UPPAC proceedings.
Is UPPAC able to proceed forward on a matter with a complaint if it's based solely on hearsay?
No, court case law and licensing says you can't take action against a license based solely on hearsay.
And do our rules reflect that, or it's just understood?
It's understood.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. We're ready for a motion unless someone else has. Board Member Longacre.
I make the motion that the committee continue to approve R277212 UPAC hearing procedures and reports draft 1 on the first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on the second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the board is that the committee continue and approve R277-212 UPAC hearing procedures and reports draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. All in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously. Let's move on to the last item on the agenda, which is item 1.5, R277-213. And then Director Rasmussen, if you can just give us an overview of the rule and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so this is the rule on the reinstatement process. If an educator's license has been suspended before they can be reinstated, they have to request a hearing, and this rule basically outlines the requirements that that goes through. Happy to answer any questions you have about that process.
So I'm sorry, Board Member Hall.
Okay, Chair.
Yeah.
So is that something that's automatic, Director Rasmussen, or like reinstatement? If they have to come and they've got to come before.
Yeah, so in each case where we suspend a license, either in their consent to discipline or the hearing report, it will list conditions they have to meet before they can request reinstatement. And then once they've met those and the time has passed, they can request a hearing. And nobody gets reinstated without a reinstatement hearing first before a UPPAC panel.
So what about on a remand or reprimand when they've been does that just fall off after 2 years? Or do they have to?
No, if you look on your consent calendar most months, you'll usually see cases where an educator has met those conditions. The board still gets to approve whether or not that reprimand is removed.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Hall. Board Member Lear, was that?
I forgot the thought I.
Oh. So, and Director Rasmussen, you and I had a brief discussion about this, but I wanted to engage you on a discussion about the board having, and you used the Latin term for it that we used to talk about in law school, under its own authority. Is that sui?
Sua sponte?
Yeah,
Okay.
sua sponte. So, and we talked about, currently the rules don't address that the board under its own authority could authorize that a reinstatement under its own authority. And you suggested that if that change wanted to be made, a change to the rule would have to be made. Is that correct? And was this the rule you were referring to?
Yes.
Okay. And Has the authority for reinstatement always resided or been extended by the board to UPAC? Is there any point in time where you can remember the board having that authority?
It's probably a question for Board Member Lear, I would say.
And this board ever had the authority to what?
Is there ever a time where UPAC didn't make the recommendations on reinstatement?
Oh, yeah, oh, yes, where the committee didn't vote, didn't,
Or there wasn't UPAC didn't do a reinstatement hearing and someone else made a determination on reinstatement?
oh, no.
In the time I've been here, it's always
It's always been.
been a
the
UPAC hearing
UPAC
and
dis-
then recommendation.
But what
from
I
the board.
thought you were asking is, did the board always agree with UPAC?
no.
And no, I
No.
mean, silly me. No, that has not always been, but I would say usually the board agrees with reinstatement more than it takes issue with other cases more often than it does with reinstatement hearings. I think they're,
That's fair.
yeah, I think, but I did remember my point from earlier, and it has to do with reinstatement hearings.
Please.
I think when we go on to discuss these rules more thoroughly, I think it would be very helpful, and I know we've gathered data before, but it helps to have it updated. I think it'd be really helpful to know how many people whose licenses are suspended, what's the percentage of those who seek reinstatement? I think it is, just anecdotally, I believe it's maybe 20% of those whose licenses were
I don't think
suspended,
it's that high, but yeah.
and maybe not even that high, which I think would give information to the board about the meaningfulness of suspended licenses and the care and the intentional nature of teachers who really want to come back. But I think that would inform our discussion in the future. The other thing about, I had another thought about reinstatement hearings I think it is not commonly understood that there are more than occasional times when UPAC thoughtfully denies reinstatements and has additional requirements, or they feel like the individual hasn't met the requirements. There's a real, I think, a real subjective component in talking to the individual and hearing the individual's sort of activities since then that is helpful. And I think that's important for the board to know. This is not a thing that they're entitled to. It's more something that a respondent seeks.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Board Member Longacre? Oh, Board Member Bollinger?
Thank you, Chair. If we can skip down to line 202, please. In this section, it talks about the reinstatement from revocation of license. We kind of talked about before, like, when you have a revocation, you're done, you're done. But it looks like there is possibly a process if there was an error, like it actually stipulates. Am I understanding that then this is the process basically that would be followed, Director Rasmussen, if somebody felt like and could you speak to, do we see this happening, or is it just based off of if there's either new evidence or there was an error in the process? Those are the things I'm noticing.
Yeah,
Is there anything
so
else that I'm missing?
This is a section that's never been used in the time that I've been here. But we did feel it was important to have a procedure in place if those things did come up. We try and be thorough in the investigation so that that's not necessary, but we recognize that sometimes you've got to have procedures. So that is in that case. I will point out also that there are some revocations that took place a long time ago where the law at the time basically treated a revocation as a 5-year suspension. And so there are some that get reinstatement hearings because their revocation was really a 5-year suspension.
Maybe one.
Well, we've had a fair
We had
number
a
in the time
couple.
I've been here.
I'd like to know how many. That would be an important piece of data too, I think.
Board Member Lear?
I had one more thought to Amanda's question and point. I actually had 2 cases. I remember 2 cases. This is what I remember. The one I remember very clearly, and it had to do with an accusation of child abuse against a husband by the wife, and the husband was the teacher. And after I don't know, after several years, it was 2 or 3 years, and it was a permanent, I don't know, recall if it was a permanent suspension or revocation. But the wife actually, the husband and wife, she recanted and said I had lied. And that's easy to do when you're not getting a paycheck. So there was actually more discussion and investigation, but that individual was allowed to have a reinstatement hearing.
And this section would provide for that.
And that, I think the language was different previously, but it was similar.
Yeah.
So it can happen.
And then let me ask just one final question. When it comes, that was revocation, but let's say their license wasn't revoked, it was just suspended. And 2 years, 3 years, there's additional evidence, material, information that's produced that may have changed the results of the hearing. Do we currently have a process that addresses reinstatement outside of what's outlined here in R277-213-3?
No.
Any other, I'm just going to ask the committee to do this because this rule, unlike the other ones, it is up for renewal, but you'll see that there are matters that have been struck and that there's new additions to this rule. Most of them appear technical, but I would just ask the committee to make sure that they review those. And if there's any questions, bring those forward. And if not, we're ready for a motion. Please.
I move that the committee continue and approve R277-213 Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission UPPAC request for licensure, reinstatement, and reinstatement procedures, draft 1 on first reading, and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
So the motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277-213 Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission, UPPAC, request for licensure reinstatement and reinstatement procedures draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. All those in favor? Aye, that's unanimous. And again, just for the record to reflect, I don't want anyone who watches this or reviews it subsequently to think that no changes were desired. This rule is up for its 5-year renewal, and the board has directed the Law and Licensing Committee to review UPPAC in its entirety. And the general sense being that it's better to better understand all these procedures and how they work together and then make possible motions rather than do it on each individual rule. So I just wanted to lay that forward. There is one matter we need to follow up with, and that was from our very first action. I had asked about would it make sense to do a survey and I talked about it in the context of this institution, but to anyone coming and saying, we're considering a 4-day instructional week, just so we gather more detailed analytics in a more scientific approach. So I asked Deputy Newey was kind enough to suggest that she would look into that and consider a motion that the committee could consider. So Deputy Newey, could I just turn a few minutes over to you and you could talk about that?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. So I think that there's a few different options that we could go with. And so I drafted the motion to be exploring options. But I think one thing that this committee might consider, given that the topic of attendance and the way that we fund schools based on attendance is such a big topic right now and going into the legislative session, it may be worth considering having a model survey that is required of LEAs that get this waiver. That way the data that they are collecting is the same data, and we can aggregate it at the state level to get kind of a big picture. But this is something that we pull in our data team and see what our options are, and we could bring that back to this committee in December to discuss further.
Sense that this is needed, desirable, and I told Deputy Newey this, there is more than enough work. So if it's not this, it'll just be something else, and I don't want to have Deputy Nui spend her time or staff time on things that may not be significant to improving public education. The committee's thoughts, and then we'll just call the motion, or we just won't pursue it. Yes, Vice Chair Bollinger.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, I do think that there may be a good reason to have a standardized model survey. The reason why is, I mean, we saw some of the data today that was confusing on what a level 1 versus a level 5 comparing. However, I will say that I would prefer to wait until after the legislative session to see what happens with some of the bills regarding school days, because that might just shift this completely. And to your point, I appreciate you valuing staff's time because they are very busy, especially going into legislative session. So I'm supportive of this idea, but I would prefer to wait to see what happens with legislation.
I think that is exceptional insight. So could we amend the motion in that the committee directs staff to explore options for a 4-day waiver and present that to the committee in April? Would that? And then we're ready for a motion. Board Member Hall?
I make the motion that the committee, sorry, she's still typing, that the committee directs staff to explore options for a standardized model survey to be used by LEAs receiving a 4-day waiver and present that information to the committee in April 2026.
I don't know if I should read it or
No, don't.
wait.
I just have a comment before you read
Yes.
it, yes, because I don't want to interrupt. And I will say I'm in support of this. However, I will just say, because when we say explore options for a standardized model, what I would say is if legislation changes to where would not be needed, and as far as like the number of school days, then that would be the presentation I would want, if that makes sense, just to clarify. Okay.
Vice Chair Bollinger gets the Optimist of the Year award for that statement. So, but should that happen, yes, you do not need to pursue the options. So the motion before the committee is that the committee directs staff to explore options for a standardized model survey to be used by LEAs receiving a 4-day waiver and present that information to the committee in April 2026. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And let me just reinforce to the committee, as we begin to look at the all the UPPAC rules, Board Member Lear sent and proposed an outline of how that should look. I would ask, and I will share that with the body, but please, if you have areas or ideas that have come up from this discussion, from other discussions, please don't hesitate to put those forward so we can map out an outline of how that will look moving forward. Board Member Lear.
To just kind of to be clear and to protect myself just a little bit, those were more, those were ideas. I certainly didn't think it was exhaustive, and I certainly think that my issues are things that have percolated for a long time. So there are probably lots of current issues that are also really relevant. I didn't want to think that was a very formal suggestion or outline.
No, I'm just going to hold you to only the items on that list. So, no, and it was not meant that way. It really was a suggestion of these are the topics that we should look at. These are the ones that concern me, and I would ask that you all do that so we can put that together. And once that's finalized, I will send it out to the committee for review and approval. With that, we'll entertain one final motion. All those in favor? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.